That's why I want to put this debate in the context of a wider vision for the island's future, which I'll do at the end of my speech. But sir, I want to say straight away that I am passionately committed to a sustainable fishing industry. Jersey needs fishing. I support fishing. I want a viable future for the industry. I have always listened to what fishers have to say, and when I was minister, I met with them more than I met with any other stakeholders in any part of my portfolio. I have great respect for them. That does not mean I support everything that every part of the fleet asks for. Let me move on and talk about the OSPAR Convention, to which Jersey is a signatory. Under the OSPAR Convention, we have an obligation to preserve and restore marine ecosystems. In particular, Annex 5 includes a commitment to prevent degradation of and damage to species, habitats, and ecological processes following the precautionary principle. As Deputy Coles said, the precautionary principle is important. It means that if you have good reason to believe that something needs protecting, you protect it first, and then, if you turn out to be mistaken, you can always release it back to fishing. You can't do it the other way around. No, sir. Because by then, it may be too late. Merle is an OSPAR-threatened habitat, and we have an obligation to protect OSPAR-threatened habitats when we identify them using the precautionary principle. The amendment would reinstate the precautionary principle. Let me try and tackle some of the arguments that members use to justify not doing so. Some members feared the day that they would not be able to buy Jersey scallops, and we'd have to rely on the French. That was a revealing comment. First, because I think something like 80% of our scallops are exported anyway, many of them to France, but also revealing because it rendered invisible a significant part of the industry, the scallop divers. The scallop divers can supply the Jersey market along with the dredgers as well, so long as we don't drive them out of business. So my point is, this is not Jersey scallops versus French scallops. It's about two different types of scallop fishing. Diving, which is sustainable, and dredging, which is destructive of merle, but can be used elsewhere in less sensitive areas. Logic would say that we should try and encourage scallop divers in the MPAs, where they cause no damage, and shift the dredgers out of these sensitive areas. An area D or 4 in the amendment is where that conflict is at its most acute. The scallop divers have said that it is crucial for them. So which side should we take? It's not a case of being for or against Jersey scallops. It's about what kind of future we see for this industry. Where do the long-term interests of the island lie? I have to say that in an OSPAR-threatened habitat that we are obliged to protect, if it's a choice between scallop dredger and a scallop diver, I know where my vote will go. Wind farm, not really an issue. Yes, if a wind farm is built, the area will be closed for the 2 years that it's built. It's standard practice to pay compensation in that situation. And then it'll be opened up to fishing again. The French opened Saint-Brieuc in July, also to mobile gear, by the way. Perhaps the most worrying argument that has been advanced against the amendment is this. We have heard that up to 80% of the dredger's catch derives from the areas that the scrutiny panel want to reintroduce for protection. If this is true, then we have a problem. Why? Because what is being said is that not only is the continued profitability of the dredging fleet entirely dependent on destroying the most valuable habitats we have, it also cannot last. How can I be sure? Because of what the minister said. He has committed to introduce protection when he has proof that the further research areas are indeed merle. And there's no one in the industry who seriously thinks the further research is going to remove huge areas that were put into those areas. Then the scallop dredgers will have to find new areas anyway. The most that turning down the amendment does is buy some time, but at the expense of great damage in the meantime. But you know the biggest irony of all, sir? It's this. We've heard so much about the precariousness of the fishing industry as a whole. And this is right. It is precarious. But why do we think it is precarious? It is precarious precisely because we have not paid enough attention to conservation. Almost all our commercial fish stocks are in decline. They're not in decline because we've protected them too much. They're in decline because we continually fudge the issue. We never learn. Scallops, by the way, are an exception at the moment. They're doing well for now. But if we carry on as we are, we'll fish out the scallops. And then, well, there's not much left, is there? Deputy Mezek talked about a just transition, and Deputy Morel talked about consent. But I would argue that neither of those arguments need to lead you to oppose the amendment. Let's take consent. Whose consent do we need? Scallop divers, conservationists, all those islanders who have written to us pleading for us to do the right thing. What about those parts of the fishing industry that would benefit from the protection of these sensitive habitats, precisely because it will improve the health of other fisheries? I would respectfully say that we need a wider definition of consent. So I believe there is a way out of the dilemma we face. On the one hand, we have the acknowledged need to protect sensitive areas in the long-term interests of a sustainable fishing industry. On the other, the need to ensure the short-term survival of the fleet, ensuring the just transition of which Deputy Mezek talked. The answer isn't so difficult. This year, almost £7 million has been allocated to the farming and fishing, thanks to the good work of the Minister, for which I commend him. That means there is money available to compensate affected dredgers. It could take the form of payments for fuel and time to reach scallop beds further afield, or to fish for longer in less prolific fishing grounds. The mechanism to make those payments is even discussed in the economic impact assessment produced by the government. As Deputy Balash is fond of saying, ministers could return to Broad Street and make it happen with the stroke of a pen. Vessels do not need to stop fishing if the amendment is passed. I do not pretend it will be simple for the dredgers to move to new areas. That's why we must give them support. But I say again, in all likelihood, it is coming anyway. We need to start transitioning the industry into the less environmentally important areas now. Getting that transitional support in place is crucial. The money is there. Ministers should do it. Surely the answer is to support the most sustainable parts of the industry, help the unsustainable parts transition to new areas, and protect the habitats that will support the replenishment of stocks for the rest of the commercial fishery. How much longer before we learn our lesson from history? Briefly mention France. It is true that the French fishing fleet does not want the MPA network to be extended, and that leads to political pressure on Jersey, as we heard from the Minister. Yet the French also know about our obligations under the OSPAR Convention. They know that these are buttressed by the TCA, and they know we have the right to protect the marl beds. I'm sure there'll be some strong language used. It'll be uncomfortable, but the French objections do not have legal foundation, and ultimately, their government knows this. So let me finish by placing this argument in a wider context. Jersey's economic future is inextricably linked to the environment. Sustainability is key, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. The opportunity for Jersey to build its future as a beacon of sustainability is huge. We've taken steps in this direction already through the Public Finances Law, which requires the budget to consider the impact of measures on future generations. In fishing, sustainability means not destroying the most sensitive habitats, because that does indeed compromise the ability of future generations to keep fishing. But we can also apply it to farming, to finance, to energy, to carbon neutrality. I think of it as green growth Jersey, a lens through which everything we do is seen through its benefits for future generations, because we know that is what will eventually enhance our economy. As the Chief Minister said in a radio interview talking about marine protection, I would like to see Jersey held aloft as an example of what can be done. So would I. So would I. But you have to earn that respect. And you don't do it by trashing 50% of the most valuable marine habitat we have. And I must say, I've been very heartened by the number of people who have written to us who get that very simple point. So, sir, I'm going to be voting for all parts of the amendment because I believe in evidence-based decision-making and because of the precautionary principle. But if you feel you can't do that, then please at least vote for parts B and D. Part B would reintroduce protection for by far the biggest area of Merle off the Enquetes. And Part D, even though it is only a small area, would be of particular benefit to the scallop divers who fish sustainably even in marine protected areas. They deserve to be given a boost because hand dive scallops is an industry that we should all want to support, and it could have a great future. We have an opportunity, sir, to send a powerful message today that we believe in the long-term future of fishing in Jersey based on principles of sustainability, a higher value industry orientated more to supplying the local market, supported through government investment, and with transitional measures to allow the small number of scallop dredgers to adapt to the closure of a part of their fishing grounds. This amendment allows scallop dredging to continue, but outside the most sensitive ecological habitats. Protecting those habitats will protect the future of the industry. It will boost the opportunities for scallop divers who fish sustainably. It will boost other parts of the industry by protecting nursery grounds for many other species. We can protect the livelihoods of the small number of fishers who will be affected through financial support. It will meet our commitments under the OSPAR Convention and under the TCA. And it will boost Jersey as a community that is a beacon of sustainable development. Let's vote for the amendment, compensate fishers appropriately, and concentrate on building a brighter, long-term future for the fishing industry. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Balash. No?
Could I raise the defo on Deputy Sullivan?
Yes, the defo is raised on Deputy Sullivan. You didn't wish to speak, Deputy Balash? You didn't wish to speak?
I beg your pardon, so my light has a life of its own, and it came on.
Deputy Gardner.
I'm pleased to follow a previous speaker, and I'll be very short. I did have deja vu moment, which took me back to 2019. And I'm looking around the state's chamber, around the members who were in 2019. We did have private meeting with Fishermen Association down at the state's members' room, I think 1920. We did discuss the rights and the influence and what would happen around Brexit and TCA. Why I did have this deja vu moment? Because I've heard the same things 5 years ago. And I did remember that we asked questions, what will happen? What are you going to do different that in 5 years we will move into sustainable fisheries? And obviously it's much longer process and it does need to have support. But it's happened 5 years ago and the similar things we're hearing today. Personally, I don't call myself environmentalist in the way is sometimes understood and expressed in the public. In public, it's usually environment is more important than people and the livelihoods of local fisher families. It's not me. I'm environmentalist in the way that we should not harm and continue to harm our environment in the short term, in unsustainable way. It's clear for all members in this assembly that this is the way forward to protect our ocean and long-term stock and keep it for the future generation. And Minister himself acknowledged it. The question is when. Now, the 100% must do it, it's agreement. Where is the disagreement? If we really drill it down, two numbers jump through this debate. One number is we're actually debating between 4 to 6%. There is some extra 4 to 6% of very, very sensitive and very, very important part of our marine, of our waters, of our ocean. And this is only 4%. Think about it, but this is very sensitive area, which is important. The second number that I picked up from the debate, we are talking about 6 boats, 6, that are going to fish and dredge the seabeds out of the 11 that have licenses. Minister for External Relations yesterday raised compensation, and Deputy Renner said that we do need to support, and I do believe it's something that we must discuss. We must consider. We cannot say that these 6 boats, they are people, they are family, they are employees, they are important. But we need to remember that this will be the very short cost to creating protection for future generations. There are always costs. And if we want to protect nature, it will be cost, and especially our seabeds. If this is the only cost for the future generation to ensure that family will fire fish in the future, will use the scallops, that we would have a stock, we need to consider. And just finishing my very short speech, think about this. I'm really pleased to say that marine protections, our seabeds, will be the only state public asset that will thrive on neglect. We don't need to do anything. We just need to protect it. And I think that our fishermen and fishing families need to be custodial of our oceans. And I can support the amendment with assurance to great investment in our fishing industry and protecting of the fishing families.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I may be surprised for Deputy Mezek to hear that I must say I agreed with most of the remarks that he made in his comments about how and why he would be not accepting the amendment and voting against it. He spoke, I think, very wisely and thoughtfully about the importance of gaining the consent of fishers, and that the industry actors, the industry whose lives, whose economic viability is important and cannot, if I may say, be simply plugged by government subsidies, matters. Deputy Renner also spoke of a historical event around the late 1800s and early 20th century. Now, I know, sir, you have commented about things in the comments made by individuals in the gallery. I draw members' attention to a plaque in the gallery that mentions the governorship of Walter Raleigh. And why do I particularly highlight that? I highlight that because, of course, it was Walter Raleigh that came up with the innovative solution or idea of giving Jersey and Guernsey boats neutrality in the important and massive opportunity of fishing off the lands of the then New France, now Canada, and New England. And at the time when England and France were at war, Jersey had the opportunity of getting that neutrality. Well, we in Jersey did a great amount of activity in that area and fished cod, dried it, and it was sent and benefited the economy of Jersey. The landmarks exist in terms of cod houses and many other industries that prospered because of it. I'm wearing a Jersey French pin badge, sir, not for any accidental reason. I'm wearing it because of the importance of our Jersey and French relations. I inherited a situation at the beginning of this Assembly's term that was a difficult one. That was the extraordinary situation which had been brought to the attention worldwide. Almost everybody I spoke to anywhere had heard of the fact that we'd had a so-called invasion of Normandy fishermen. Why did that happen? Well, I think I've already previously confessed to the Assembly, sir. I was actually not elected at the time, but I was on the boat with the Normandy fishermen because I wanted to understand what their concerns were. I wanted to understand both sides of the argument and to work out what on earth had gone on and how this thing had got to that stage. And of course, history and this Assembly knows that both Deputy Renouf and I, in his role as Environment Minister and me as External Relations Minister, got to work, and I think we would both agree that we effectively found a solution to that licensing problem. And it wasn't without a great deal of work. I made it my business to go to France to speak to French fishers, speak to the local industry here, and meet government representatives at the highest level, which I happen to have met previously in other areas where I actually knew some of the ministers personally from previous contacts. So I make, Ma'am, I make these observations because I am aware, and I asked the Minister for External Relations yesterday, whether or not he was aware of the stance that the French fishing experts have in relation to conservation of stocks and the way that the international conventions which have been cited can be implemented and are implemented and are reviewed by different sides of experts. They say that an economist, ma'am, you get two economists in the room or three and you get three different answers. And they're not all necessarily wrong. There are sometimes different approaches that are taken by different experts to achieve the same objective. And some on each side of those arguments, economic or fishing or otherwise, may simply disagree with the other person's view, but both can be legitimate. And what I would respectfully say, in taking Deputy Mezek and I think the underlying principles that he is making and others are advancing against this amendment, and I think the Minister has done, which is why I will not be supporting the amendment, is that there is got to be, in Jersey's case, a solution which is based upon not just a British, Anglo-English approach to sea conservation and fisheries protection, but one that equally takes on board the respected and highly well-resourced experts from French universities and the French maritime experts. And this is where I have not heard that that has been done by the bringers of this amendment. The previous minister spoke about the needing to have a precautionary principle. Well, I spoke about the introduction of a regulatory matter concerning competition and the comments of Professor Sir John Vickers when he said that it was important to be both precautionary but pragmatic. And it's important to be pragmatic. I'm not a short-term thinker. I believe in the long term. And I believe that it is important that if we are to maintain and grow and see our valued fishing sector survive, and I think we are now talking about survival, sadly, and I disagree, if I may, with Deputy Renouf's arguments that it is the fishing industry is in the state that it's in because of an inability to conserve stocks. I actually would suggest respectfully that it has been the commercial restrictions that French fishers have faced, Jersey fishers have faced with the landing of their catch and getting it into French markets. And I lament, I don't understand why that actions have not been taken more vociferously with a more efficacious and strong line to get that important sanitary station open in Granville. So I always hesitate Ma'am, I always hesitate when I speak about fishing in this assembly. I used to be holding the presidency of Environment and Public Services, and I knew members used to take I'm a farmer's son, and I'm not a fishing expert, but I do know that there is a different view taken by experts in Britain, in England, versus France in relation to dredging. I know that there is a general view that dredging is stopped and is bad and should not be done at all. Dredging causes significant damage. I understand that because it serves up sediment. The consensus is that the dredging activity should stop. However, there is a view, which I heard myself when in discussions with French fishers, and when I went to Normandy and Brittany and spoke with fishermen at length, I learnt that they have a slightly nuanced and different approach, and that is that they understand that the impact of their activities can disturb the natural sea environment, but that they can also, their activities also, in the case of a seabed which is already disturbed or has already been damaged by natural events or from movements of tides or whatever, but they are not all perfect, that actually the activities of those French trawlers or whatever, actually by reseeding can create the environment of a better long-term scallop fishery in the longer term. And some members may simply scoff at this, and they may say no. But I know, and I'm sure the Minister in his summing up will confirm, that there is a different view held by French experts in relation to this. And as an island I could address this assembly in French, and as an island which is apparently proud of our French relations, then I think that we should be mindful and respectful and take on board the views of those French experts, and they should be equally made clear and listened to and taken account of in the decisions that this Assembly has. I think I've got a 10-minute limit, so that's where I have to, 15, I won't go on much longer, ma'am. I was going to finish then, but I'll just say just a couple more things. It really is the case, ma'am, that our fishing industry has suffered greatly by events that have prevented them from being able to easily land their catch. There are all sorts of unintended consequences of Brexit, which have meant that the fishing waters for certain fishing activities have a different rating than the immediately adjacent and interflowing French waters. There is a whole myriad of issues that can be tackled. And I'm sorry to hear that there has not been so much progress during the period of time where I have not been active, sadly, for personal reasons in recent months. But I am disappointed. I am really disappointed that the efforts that I had made to progress and get that Granville landing station open has not happened. And if we are going to have a future of harmony, of close working with our French cousins, who we have always, over centuries, worked together in what has been regarded as an area where both French, Norman, Breton, and Jersey fishers fish, then we should do more to get that common and that consensus approach. Jersey was regarded as a unique place. I know the Granville Bay Agreement and etc. became needed updating because of the voting situations between Jersey and all the rest of it. But we've lost all that, and now we're going to be proposing some conservation measures which the Minister doesn't want, if this Assembly approves the amendment, which will damage our French relations. It will damage our local fishers, and it will damage. And if it's already proving difficult, maybe the External Relations Minister will ask me to give him a hand, because I'm happy to do so, as a backbencher, to advance those issues in France and speaking in French to those people to advance those massively important issues. If we send out a message that we are going to hurt our local fishers and hurt the French fishers that are also going to be deprived of the ability to fish, I think we are doing ourselves a disservice. We are acting in the short term, and we should be medium to long term, respecting the fact that there are experts in both France and the United Kingdom and Jersey that need to find a way of working together and finding solutions together. And it is not, I'm afraid, good enough simply for members to say, oh, well, it's all right because the economic development minister, the sustainable economic development minister said yesterday there's 1.1 million available for fishers. Well, I'm afraid subsidies and keeping our fishing industry reliant on subsidies is not a way forward. They've got to be economically viable, and there are huge amounts of areas where there can be cooperation in terms of net zero, the use of carbon fishing. There's huge investments that are required, and basically sending another message that we're not listening and we don't care and we know better, and they know nothing, and we don't respect the French view, I'm afraid is going to send entirely the wrong message to our French cousins, of which we had made such a lot of progress in my time to get a much better relationship with. And so I am not going to support this amendment. I'm not going to support any of the amendments that the Minister does not agree with and has not got consensus of. And I must say that I am somewhat jaundiced, and I have listened, I've been out of this Assembly, but I have listened to the scrutiny panel's work, and I must say that I think it's really important that we are taking scrutiny in an entirely independent and open, really open mind approach, and that we also listen to the experts that come from our French cousins. And with those remarks, I hope members will agree that we should not vote in favour of something which will undermine the vitality of our fishing industry here and that of France, and will cause consequential damage, which will be difficult to repair, because we've seen the impact of basically negative actions before, and I don't want to see them again.
Deputy Tadio.
Thank you, Mum. I'm pleased to follow that speaker. I have to say, Mum, I don't think it was for you to intervene with something that came very close to, I think, imputing improper motives to the whole of scrutiny. When the previous speaker said he easily imputed, I think, the coded, not even coded political message that he thinks scrutiny is not being objective here. And although this isn't my scrutiny panel, as a member of scrutiny and a chair of a panel, I take extreme exception to that, because I think actually what we are seeing here is a very evidence-led and very thorough review that's been taking place from a cross-section of members of this Assembly with different political hues, I would add. And they all seem to be coming in the same direction with the same evidence. And sometimes that evidence is difficult to hear, but I think it's the job of this Assembly to consider all of the arguments. So that's the first point I would make, is that we don't need to descend into those kind of unfounded insinuations.
The member give way.
I won't give way.
I was just going to apologise if I had given that impression.
The deputy also said that if you get 3 economists in a room, you can get 3 different answers. However, if you take 21 independent or mostly independent Jersey politicians and put them in a room, hey presto, you get 1 answer. And that's what happens with the Council of Ministers, you could argue. But let's see if that's the case. Now, the first thing to say is that it's absolutely correct that in debates like this, we feel the public pressure. We often complain as politicians that the public don't want to engage in politics. Well, I think we've seen over the last week that that isn't true. I think we've been strongly, I'll call it lobbied, that's not a dirty word, and we've been emailed, Mum, by many members of the public, and it has to be said that those emails are very strongly, in terms of quantity, in favour of what the scrutiny panel is proposing. But we also know that we have a fishing industry in Jersey which I think is under difficulty, and it's absolutely right that the fishers, whether they're all here, have made a presence felt in the Assembly. And I think we also need to pay tribute to that industry, because I have friends who are fishermen, they are men, as it happens, And in some cases, they've paid a very physical toll for their profession. And it's something which goes beyond just being about money, but often it is in the blood, and it's something of a lifestyle. And we know that people get up early, work long days, and it's not for everybody, sir. I think it's important to recognise that. So we are dealing with a complicated issue here. And I said it last week when we were welcoming some colleagues from Guernsey and the Isle of Man, is that often we're expected to vote one way or the other. We're expected to have an opinion which is informed, and we try to do our best, and I think that's why we listen to all sides of the argument. And Ma'am, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but it's somebody we know very well, and that you all know well, was the late Deputy Duhamel, who was a minister for a while of the environment, who cared very passionately and deeply about Jersey, its economy, but also its environment. And he used to talk to me, because I sat next to him where Deputy Miles is sitting now, for quite a few years. And he would talk about the concept of fuzzy voting. And he'd say that it's often in this assembly, well, always in this assembly, we have to choose a pour or a conch. And that, in his mind of a mathematician, sometimes it would be nice to be able to vote 60% in favour or 30% against. Alas, we can't do that. But what we can do is, when it comes to the mel beds, for example, we can actually take that nuanced approach. We can say that we want to vote 30% in favour of the mel beds, or let's say 80% in favour of the mel beds, depending which way we look at it. And I have to admit, I didn't know what mel was until about 2 weeks ago. And I looked into both what it was, and I looked into the etymology of it, and I was interested to know that it comes from, I think, an old Breton word. So, hey, we all learn as we go along. But what interests me here really is the politics of this as much as anything else. So the humanity of it and the environmental impact, both of those do interest me. But I'm interested in the politics and what's going on in this assembly. So if I read the following statement, I was going to open with this, but I thought people might mistake it for my own view, which is it's not necessarily not my view. If I say I'm completely against a continuation of heavy-duty trawling and dredging, and that has to be stopped. It's pure vandalism on our seabed, and it's destroying incredibly valuable habitats, potentially carbon-rich habitats that can be nurtured and make a huge difference to our contribution. Now, that's a statement that could be made in this debate. It's a statement, if it were made, you would say, oh, right, so at least we know where that person stands. He or she is going to support the Environment Scrutiny Panel. They're in favour of protecting the seabed and the mel, presumably. But of course, that doesn't seem to be the case, because that's a statement that's been made by Deputy Farnham about 2 or 3 years ago. He's yet to speak, so he can obviously talk to that if he wants to. It seems to me that let's find out what the Chief Minister's position is. But I believe that it seems like the Council of Ministers are strongly encouraging some of their members to vote against this. And what I would say is that this issue is too big an issue to play whip politics with. It's something that we as a party recognise. We're not exercising a party whip on this. We recognise that there are many issues that need to be thought of on here. But the strange thing is, it seems like that the Chief Minister is actually whipping himself in this particular one, because he's whipping himself to agree to a point and a proposition that he actually doesn't agree with, which is opposing scrutiny's position. Because I'm presuming when he brought the Blue Island Foundation and the idea for protecting our coastline, that this wasn't necessarily what he signed up to be part of this. I also have great respect for the Environment Minister and the Economic Development Minister, but I do think we need to point out, if we are talking about balance, it seems to me that we no longer have an Environment Minister. We've got 2 Economic Development Ministers in the Assembly. I think we used to have an Environment Minister, and we still have the same Economic Development Minister. In his speech that Deputy Wall made, and I don't always find myself on the same voting side as Deputy Wall, and I don't know if I will today, is that I think he made the slightly uncomfortable comment, uncomfortable in the sense that there's no votes in it for him, because the seabed and mel can't vote and they don't have a voice. But he said, who raises the voice for the protection of that of the seabed? So I also think that is something that needs to be brought in. And of course, we have the former Environment Minister who has made the contribution to this. I think that many others would want to be made. So where does that leave us in terms of going forward? I think it has to be recognised, first of all, that we do need to support the fishing industry. More to the point, is it's no different to the agricultural industry in the sense that we also need to be mindful of sustainable practices in agriculture. We know that the way agriculture works in Jersey, for example, or the fisheries, is that we cannot compete with the strong subsidies and perhaps the other types of support that big nations can give to their industries. But we can try, and I think we can start to do that. And I think there is the uncomfortable question about where sustainability lies in that. And I think we as consumers also have to be part of that. The first point is that I don't want to make any of these points glibly, but I think it's important that we're here to speak freely and openly, is that we're not dependent on scallops, for example, for our survival as humans. So if we stopped eating scallops tomorrow, whether they're French or Jersey scallops, and I don't know if they taste any different, and I don't know if the scallops in these particular meal beds have a nationality. I think they're probably neutral in that respect. And whether they're hand-dived or trawled, I think they probably taste the same. And I certainly know that as far as possible. I try and buy my scallops directly from the harbour. I often get them at Bonwy when I can, and they're as fresh as you can get. And that's one of the privileges that we have of living in Jersey. So I think there is a complicated issue. I think government needs to get to grips with what we do. I think consumers generally need to actually get to the point where they accept that they have to pay more for food generally. I think we heard some comments yesterday in question time, ma'am, because I think it is about a wider debate that's going on about what we put into our bodies and what we're willing to pay for it. And I think the irony is that people spend many, 40% perhaps of their monthly income just to survive here, to pay a rent or a mortgage. And actually then they go to a supermarket and they're looking for yellow label produce to put in that may be highly processed, because we can't actually afford the basics in life. Good quality fish, good quality produce should be something that we're willing to pay for as islanders. And we should be able to pay for that because we've got the money in the bank and in our back pocket to do that. So it is part of a wider cost of living issue, which of course also is circular, and it affects those industries that we're talking about and those who work in them. So the bottom line here is that when it comes to this particular vote, I do want to see a plan for sustainability. I also think it's just short-termism, because if we vote for this today because we think it's an easy, quick win and it might get some economic impact immediately, we find ourselves in a situation that we actually are destroying valuable pieces of our seabed, which once they're destroyed can't go back. So I think the cautious approach has to be the right one. We have a period of time where we put the protection in wider and we can reduce it, because if we put it in at a low level and then say, actually, let's see how we go in 5 years' time, and say, actually, in 5 years' time it did have an impact on the seabed, we can't go back, but we can go back from this position. So I think in the longer term, we don't need to be thinking in just terms of 5-10 years' time. We need to be thinking about the 50, 100-year sustainability of our industry. And just because I don't want to be outdone on any historical fronts, ma'am, is that I don't have the exact dates, but I'm reminded of the great oyster wars that happened off the Bay of Grouville, when oysters weren't cultivated as they are today in a very sustainable way. And Jersey really leads when it comes to the oyster industry. We've got, oysters that you can eat all year round, and they're filtered. And I've never once, I don't think, been ill off a Jersey oyster, and touch wood, so to speak. But I have been ill from other seafood elsewhere, but let's not go into that. So we do have a fishing industry that we can be proud of. We've got an oyster industry that we can be proud of. But back in the day, the oyster industry was decimated completely eradicated in the space of a couple of decades. And there was great tension between the English and the French in that area. And it's a shame the governor's not here, but even a governor died in the process when he tried to go out and resolve the issue. He wasn't shocked, by the way. The weather was just so terrible that he caught cold and died of his symptoms. So he was the only victim of that tension. But I can't help feeling, and Deputy Southern might appreciate this, it was definitely the case when I first started, the shroud-waving arguments. If we don't do this today, if we don't vote against the scrutiny panel, there's going to be a third world war that's going to happen between the French. And it seems that we're, as much as I am a Francophile, I think these are our territorial waters. The first and foremost thing that we need to protect is our industry, and secondly, our seabed. And if it annoys some French people who can't fish here for whatever reason, I think we just say it's tough. The rules apply to Jersey fishers and to French fishers, and whatever those rules are have to apply equally. And I don't think there's going to be a diplomatic fallout from it. And I think if there is a diplomatic fallout, that shouldn't be the pressure to which we give in. It should be the considerations which are both economic immediately for us, but primarily environmental. I remind members that we are debating here an amendments that are brought forward by the Environment Scrutiny Panel, and I think they've looked at it objectively, not just themselves, but they've got officers that work with them who keep them on the straight and narrow, because if there is, it certainly happens on my panel, if there's any risk that we're going over into politics, if you like, big P politics, our officers will very quickly bring us back and say, you might want to be careful about that because the evidence doesn't necessarily say that. So for my part, I'm happy to go on balance with what the Environment Panel is saying. There is a bigger piece of work to be done here. And because the fuzzy voting button isn't available, I'm probably going to be voting P this time, but with all of those caveats that I've said during the speech.
Deputy Farnham.
Might use 2 mics because risk of losing my voice at the moment, but I'm pleased to follow Deputy Tadia and firstly remark on his comment that when you get 21 states members in a room, quite often we do that in the government because we include assistant ministers in our meetings. We all agree. Well, that's definitely not the case. We do not agree on everything, but this government is now in a place where we do reach points of agreement by proper debate around the Council of Ministers table. And whilst we don't agree, I think we're all adult enough to follow the principle of democracy and the majority rule. And I think this Assembly does at large the same thing. And we're here having a good debate about an issue which has rights and wrongs on both sides of the argument. Referring to Deputy Tadia as well, I've fished out, excuse the pun, my amendment to the Island Plan in 2021. And members will know, members of the fishing industry will know I have always been a strong proponent of greater protection for our fisheries, producing a marine park environment for the economic and tourism and eco benefits that brings, and I am still in favour of that. And this amendment to the Island Plan in 2021 advocated a phased approach to achieve these by 2025, which would, had this been successful, we might be further down the road, but I have always advocated that we do it in a phased approach, managing the needs of our fishing industry. There are some good points made in here, I believe, but it wasn't approved in the debate 4 years ago. I'm going to, excuse me if I reiterate some points that other members have made, not least the External Relations Minister, but I'm going to try and reinforce some general points because I think it's important. And the vision of the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan is for a thriving marine environment, providing environmental, economic, cultural and social benefits. The economic benefits being largely for a sustained fishing industry and fishing fleet. And our fishers don't want handouts, they want help to have sustainable businesses. I am concerned about the environmental damage of dredging and trawling. And if we are to move away from those in due course, we have to manage how we do that and manage how we look after the interests of those who are engaged in that activity. The plan has been developed, I would remind members, and I commend the Environment Minister for finding this balance with the industry and with other stakeholders, following extensive review of existing equivalent marine spatial plans from both large and small nations, and this includes England and France, but also various small coastal and island states, Jersey has continuously consulted with relevant agencies in Brittany and Normandy, Paris and Brussels, as well as in the UK and the other Channel Islands. And I was pleased to hear Deputy Ozif's comments on that, and not many members know more about our international relations in those areas than the Deputy, who has significant experience and knowledge from working diplomatically. And he knows how challenging that is. But I'll come back to that. Jersey has contributed to the French Marine Spatial Plan workshops and consultations to deliver a reciprocal consultation input. And the Marine Plan touches on issues such as trade routes and energy production, and highlights the need for a balanced and sustained system to manage competing interests linked to adjacent territories. The Marine Plan protected area recommendations will need to be given consideration in the light of the TCA once finalised, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. The system for moving to protection of these sites must be considered for its impact on local and visiting fishing boats. It will take work to make the adaptations required for the fleet to be able to continue in a sustainable way. I'm not sure I'm going to continue in a sustainable way, but I shall try. The vision of the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan is for a thriving marine environment area, thriving environmental environment, whilst maintaining its economic viability, cultural and social benefits. To reinforce that point, the plan places values on the coast and sea, as well as recreational space for islands, residents and tourists. The plan looks to a sustainable commercial use, from aquaculture to fishing, including current and potential future activities such as offshore seaweed farming and offshore energy generation, and many other aspects where we can develop our aquaculture sector. The plan highlights the need for space for infrastructure connections, be they cables or shipping. Development of offshore wind is referenced but not covered in detail, as it is a parallel work stream. The objective is to dovetail any wind needs, once clear, into the next iteration of the Marine Plan. But of course, we are learning all the time about the ramifications of wind as that type of energy provision is starting to settle down, and there are consequences of that which we also need to understand. Bringing these elements together over the plan highlight the need to manage the spatial challenges in those areas, in our increasingly, in what is becoming increasingly busy, potentially in busy sea. And we have to manage those areas carefully to ensure that there is space for the traditional industry of fishing to continue and do well, and be there for a long time into the future. And of course, the diversification of fishing methods is also to be supported and developed. For the fishers, so the Rural Marine Support Scheme is therefore going to be an extremely vital tool to help them move towards more modern, sustainable fisheries, a model that will allow profitable, sustainable fisheries in an environment of much greater marine protection. But as I reiterate before, I believe many fishers don't want handouts. They want to be able to have a regime and a structure that allows them to have a profitable and sustainable business. The scrutiny panel's first amendment proposing an immediate inclusion on all further research and phased areas of the MPA network will, not may, but will be met, will not be met with a positive response on the continent, and will, I believe, not could, will, I believe, result in wider repercussions to our overall relationship, not just with our friends and cousins in Normandy and Brittany, but France and the EU, and is likely to have broader repercussions for the economic stability of the area. These issues are material considerations we have to take into account. Whether we like them or not, we have to take them into account in our deliberations. But if we have a phased approach, that will help us manage those relations, because we probably want to get to the same place. France have committed to 30 by 30, although their marine protected spaces are managed differently, and I see satellite representations of those marine protected areas being fished regularly. I'm not sure how they are policed. But I want to reiterate the phased approach as recommended in the Minister's proposition will be hugely important in helping us manage the transition with France. The whole thrust of the amendment is to remove that balanced and phased approach, which will force some of our fishers headlong into a situation where they can no longer fish. And we want to avoid that. And I go back to my amendment and my previous work on Marine Park, and it's always been about a phased approach whilst working to improve the fisheries at the same time. And we have, although some progress has been made with that, we still have a way to go in where that ends up. That said, the ambition of a 30 by 30 means many countries, large and small, are working to improve their marine protected area coverage, with many either designating new areas or upgrading existing MPAs to be highlighted, to be highly protected. And the current plans that are on the table today, the roughly 22%, I think it is, that we are proposing to protect now, will keep Jersey in the leading quarter of all islands and nations worldwide. So we are ahead of the game. So I urge members to reject the amendments, to support the Minister and the Government in the proposed phased approach that will help manage our fisheries, help our local economy, be hugely important in maintaining our diplomatic relationships with our French neighbours, and contribute to the overall political and economic stability of the region. Thank you.
Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, Ma'am. Like some others who've spoken before me, I come at this not from the position of being an expert in marine conservation, but as an interested islander and as an elected member charged with representing the interest of parishioners I serve. I care very much about what is happening to the marine environment and also to those who fish our waters. As the Minister has already said, the Marine Spatial Plan is not merely a document. It serves as a blueprint for how we will manage our marine resources, balance economic development with environmental stewardship, and ensure that our waters remain vibrant and sustainable for generations to come. It is a matter of significant importance to our coastal communities, our marine ecosystems, and our shared future that we recognise the differing perspectives to have emerged in discussions surrounding this plan. These contrasting viewpoints highlight the complexity of marine governance and the diverse interests at play. On the one hand, the Minister's proposition that a more liberal interpretation of protected areas would deliver a balanced approach to the important matter of protecting biodiversity in our waters. Some would say this approach recognises the economic imperatives of our fishing industry and coastal communities, while still maintaining a commitment to environmental sustainability. However, the environmental panel, scrutiny panel, presents a contrasting viewpoint. The panel has raised concerns about the potential risks associated with the plan, emphasising the importance of enhancing protection of our marine ecosystems, which are already under pressure from climate change, pollution and fishing activity. The scrutiny panel advocates for a precautionary principle, arguing that we must prioritise the health of our waters and the biodiversity they support, alongside supporting assertive economic development. The panel's perspective is one of caution, urging us to consider the long-term implications of our decisions on the marine environment and the communities that depend on it. This divergence is not merely a debate over policy. It reflects deeper values and priorities that shape our relationship with the sea. Both perspectives are valid and stem from a genuine desire to protect our shared resources and ensure a prosperous future. The waters that surround us are not just a resource to be exploited. They are a shared heritage that requires our careful and responsible stewardship. We must, therefore, strive to create an outcome that incorporates these insights and the concerns expressed by local fishermen and the views of scrutiny. As have many others, most have received a lot of communication on this issue. Many of my constituents are seriously concerned about the plan and what might happen to mole beds, in particular if marine protection areas are reduced in size and geography. Equally, fishermen are concerned about their livelihood and that our fishing industry will be threatened by amending the plan produced by the Minister. If we are serious about sustainability, we do need to take action now in order to protect our precious marine environment for the longer term. The evidence shows protecting marine areas contributes to greater yields overall. It is a difficult choice to make, but when it comes to establishing what we have control over and what we don't, we have to make sure that our decisions are primarily guided by reliable evidence as well as the need to be pragmatic. One thing is for sure, whether it's the fishing industry or any other industry, we can't fish the last fish or cut down the last tree and expect to keep thriving on this planet. Maybe we could look to other parts of the world for some additional inspiration. Take Australia, for example. Every day, more Australians are demanding that their fish isn't caught by fishing that damages its oceans or puts its wildlife at risk. Australia's fishing industries and precious wildlife is considered sustainable when it has negligible impact on the ecology of sensitive marine habitats, selects targets fish carefully and leaves fish behind to replenish stocks, and has little or no bycatch. Given the number of emails I've received and the people I've spoken to, it seems local voices are becoming increasingly louder to secure the same here in Jersey. Sustainable fisheries are critical to the future of the sea. We do have control over what we can protect, the economic decisions we want to make, the management of our political relationships, and the incentives we might introduce to safeguard livelihoods. I appreciate the Minister has attempted to reach a compromise in the plan, but I would ask if approaching this through compromise is actually serving us well. I agree with the Minister, it is a significant leadership challenge and no surprise to find that you can't please all of the people all of the time. But, Ma'am, the job of government is to take difficult decisions, and in the face of mounting evidence both locally and internationally, it is clear that protection of our marine environment in the way suggested through this amendment is in the interest of securing a local, sustainable fishing industry for the future. This may be difficult to hear, but it would be in the interest of future generations if we are able to demonstrate that we are capable of making hard and difficult choices about the way forward, that we are able to set aside the culture war mentality, as Deputy Mezek alluded to yesterday, and work on a common purpose. I believe this is possible. Other governments have managed it, so why can't we? Fishers, government, politicians, international partners, academics and environmentalists all working together to bring a new approach to fisheries management, constructive political engagement and protection of our marine environment. We know there's a huge amount at stake and we can control the conditions necessary to ensure there is a sustainable future for our communities and protection of the wonderful biodiversity and ecosystems which sustain us. These control mechanisms have to be proportionate and relevant for the times we are in. And as nature adapts to changing circumstances, so must we. Nothing ever remains the same. I am in complete awe of the efforts our fishers go to produce their catch. In particular, excuse me, those who already practice sustainable fishing practice. We need more of that. We are in a good place to set the standard for sustainable fishing. We need to make progress now to advance and transform our approach to food sustainability and using technology, research and collaboration to advance sustainable fishing practice. If we don't act now, it will be more difficult to address the sustainability issues we face and lead to ecosystems becoming less resistant to climate change and offering fewer ecosystem benefits for future generations. Mom, I do believe the proposed amendments to the plan take account of these issues, and so will be supporting adoption of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have several members listed to speak. The Constable of Grouville, followed by the Constable of St Mary and Deputy Dugo. Constable of Grouville, you go first.
Thank you, Ma'am. Over 20 years ago now, my dear brother-in-law perished at sea. He was a professional fisherman, and sadly, as so many others have perished at Corbière, he died there. And I remember very well his words to me then. I know that was 20 years ago. I know technology has moved on considerably since then, GPS tracking, transponders, and many other things that can actually bring errant fishermen to book. But he said to me then, it doesn't matter how many protection areas you have, our neighbours will still fish them. And that's words that have resonated over the last couple of days. And I would like, in the Minister's summing up, if he could give us a hint about what enforcement is going on throughout the industry now and whether he's willing to poke the bear. I will be supporting him and I won't be supporting these amendments for another reason. I'm a great believer and supporter of food resilience in the island. I'm very concerned about that going forward. And the words of Deputy Morel resonated very strongly with me yesterday when he said the Minister wanted to bring the industry with him. And that resonated for one reason, that I've noted over the skies of Jersey some wonderful buzzards and marsh harriers that are at the top of their food chain. And that's because the customer and the government have brought the farmers with them. And I believe the Minister is doing the same. He's bringing the fishermen with him and he's going to work with them forward in with our environmental issues. And that is why I won't be supporting these amendments. I will be supporting the fourth, which will protect hand-dyed scallops, although sadly I'm not able to eat them. My doctor has told me they're too high in cholesterol, and so it's one of those things that's banned from my diet, but I did have some last week. Thank you.
Constable St Mary. Constable St Mary.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, I'm sorry to take a different view to my fellow constable, but I felt I should speak as the one member of the scrutiny panel who has not yet spoken. And in that vein, there's probably very little original I can say, but there have been certain references by them and by others which I think require clarification and renewed focus on what we are about. The first point I make, ma'am, is that reference has been made to the composition of the scrutiny panel. I do not think it is made up of what some might call traditional environmentalists. I was invited by the then chair and indeed by the previous chair, to be a member of the panel, which covers not only the environment but infrastructure and housing. It is a very broad brief, and I like to think, and I hope the chair will not disillusion me, I like to think I was invited because of a fairly wide interest and a pragmatic approach to matters. And that is how all the panel viewed the evidence. I had no preconceived ideas as to the composition of the spatial marine plan or how it was best enforced. We listened to evidence from a variety of people, fishermen of all kind, or fishers of all kind. And that is what persuaded us, or me, to arrive at the conclusion we did. I think the starting point, ma'am, is the fact that we did not dream up these additional areas for the amendment. They were there, evidenced by the previous government research. The mole beds are vulnerable, and that was the first port of call as to what we should be doing. So why are they now being taken out? It is suggested that further research might take place to determine whether they are as vulnerable as we might. But as Deputy Cole said yesterday, we can't leave them in and then decide to protect them later on. The damage will be done. The other way around is open to us. We complete the amendments, we protect them, and should the evidence be not forthcoming, then they can be added back. But I doubt if that is the case. That there appears to be sufficient evidence to show that they and the other areas discovered are now vulnerable, and immediate action need be taken. And I also take up one of the points made by Deputy Tadier, which is that some of the speeches made yesterday seem to be on the basis that this is a good start to the proceedings. We can, and it's right, we don't need to arrive at our 30% straight away. We can add to it at a later date. And by doing that, we actually defer the painful decision on what we do with the fishing industry. And that is simply kicking the can down the road now. We need to take action now and address the problems of the fishing industry now. The Marine Spatial Plan anticipates dialogue as to diversification and in the end result compensation to the fishing industry. That was made yesterday, and I do not see why it should now be regarded as a no-go area. In other areas, we are going to have to compensate small businesses for helping them to meet the minimum wage, and this is an example of it. But hopefully it will not come to that. Hopefully the negotiations and discussions will result in more diversification, because the last thing that any of us want is a decreased fishing industry. But I do fear, ma'am, that if we do not pass this amendment, it will be simply a recipe for no action, mole beds being destroyed, and it will be too late to restore the situation when we eventually address the very points we should be doing now. So, ma'am, I shall be supporting my panel with their amendments, and I urge other members to do likewise. Thank you.
Deputy Dubney.
Thank you, Ma'am. Other members have mentioned there are people present in the gallery today, and I want to echo the words of previous speakers that they are very, very welcome. And also to echo what Deputy Tadier said, that it is very important that islanders engage with us in this way. And we must listen, and I have listened. I also, Ma'am, consider who is not present in the gallery today and who will speak for them. And for that, firstly, I have turned to the scrutiny report. It's a very good piece of work, and indeed contains and distills the voice of all fishers, and indeed there were a range of views, I believed. And some fishers are very concerned about the overfishing, and indeed the panel has a range of political views. So, Ma'am, I would like to place my trust in the conclusions of this panel. I believe it is based on a wide range of robust research and evidence. Another group not present in the gallery today, Ma'am, is children. And who will speak for children? I would like to do that in my speech today. Because, of course, children are all either in education or they are so young that they can't engage independently with us. And we do have a duty, every single one of us, not just myself, but every single member of this assembly. Ma'am, we have a duty to consider the rights of the children of this island when we make decisions. And the evidence is clear on this. It might be a difficult decision for many, and I feel that today it is a very difficult decision. And I can understand it must be difficult for those who are in government. There's been mention of having the discussion at Council of Ministers before coming to the Assembly. And I know that sometimes compromises are asked of individual ministers who perhaps have values that slightly differ from the majority of the Council of Ministers. And to those members, I would say to them, it is not too late to change your mind and vote in accordance with your values. And I would ask that members do that when they press the voting buttons today. Going back to children, Ma'am. So last month at the UN, there was the latest in a series of talks around a UN declaration for future generations. So when I am asking members to think about children, I'm not just asking members to think about the children who are alive today, our children on the island today, but future children, our children's children's children, and so on. And other jurisdictions, I think, are doing this better than us, and I think it's something that we need to start doing more. Indeed, in Wales, I think for a few years now, they've had a Minister for Future Generations. So they have that built into their decision-making processes, that person who is nominated to consider and speak up for the children of the future. I think we need to do something like that. In fact, I think our Environment Minister role should be Minister for the Environment and Future Generations. The two are inextricably linked. And having this conscious and intentional approach to the decisions we make and how they will impact on future generations is critical. And the reason why it is so important to have a step in our decision making, as we do, where we have to consider children's rights, and I believe considering future generations. It's important, Mum, because our brains are not wired to think of the future in that way. Our brains are not wired to think about our own deaths, and indeed not wired at all to be able to contemplate easily catastrophic situations like climate change and damage, long-term damage to our environment. This is widely accepted in the field of psychology, and the theory is called terror management theory. There is a primitive part of our brain that we all have that still operates in every human brain, and it's the same part that would flood our bodies with adrenaline if we were faced with a present threat like a saber-toothed tiger, or indeed islanders saying to us that they're concerned about their livelihoods. That's a present threat that we are concerned about. But that same part of our brain that would help us to tackle that immediate threat actually also stops us from thinking about threats which are so big and so hard to actually conceptualize in our human brains that if we were to think about them too deeply, the result would be an inability to function in the present day, which would affect our survival. So our brain plays tricks on us, and we must attempt to overcome this. We are not cave people. This assembly is filled with intelligent, educated individuals, and we are tasked with thinking through these complex problems on behalf of our population so that they do not have to do that complex psychological work of considering long-term catastrophic threats. We must intentionally not think with those primitive parts of our brain, but use our higher reasoning skills and take the greatest care when making a decision on how to vote today. We must consider the fact that worldwide and in our island we are facing a critical loss of biodiversity, and this includes in our waters. We must consider the fact that we all have a responsibility to make decisions with due regards to children's rights, and I include future children in that. Well, and we do also have a responsibility to ensure that those who work so hard in this noble profession, the fishers who are maintaining a cultural legacy, that if this profession can no longer provide a sufficient income to their families and to their own children, that these individuals who are so much a part of upholding our culture and history, they must be supported so that they can in a way that preserves the marine environment, continue to forge a livelihood on the water. I would like, for example, to see local seafood being served as part of school meals. I believe that we do have solutions to this present threat. And I think we can do both, Mum. I think we can find solutions to the present problems, and I think we can make decisions which are in the long-term best interests of our population and future generations. I will be voting with the scrutiny panel today, and I urge members to take great care when they vote today and consider the impact on future generations.
Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Balash.
Ma'am, this has been a good debate, and I'm not going to repeat the arguments made by other members. Deputy Ossoff said that the precautionary principle needed to be applied with pragmatism, which is another way of saying that in this quite difficult debate, the interests of the environment clash with the interests of the fishing industry. And while I might, in principle, be an environmentalist and keen to preserve the environment so far as one can, that principle, I think, has to acknowledge that the livelihoods of people who rely upon the sea for their income has also to be taken into account and balanced with it. I agreed with Deputy Tadier that the ripping up of the seabed is a practice which seems to me must be brought to a halt as soon as possible. But in bringing it to a halt, the Minister has to take account of the interests of those whose livelihoods depend upon it, and whether it is compensation or assistance in some way to find other fishing grounds or other means of fishing, those things have to be dealt with. My real purpose in standing up is to ask the proposer of the amendment in her response to confirm the point that was made by Deputy Curtis in relation to area D shown on the diagram produced by the University of Plymouth. This is a very small area of the Ecrahose, right in the heart of the Ecrahose, and Deputy Curtis said that it was fished by only one individual. It does seem to me, in principle, that that individual could be asked to move to another fishing ground if he is indeed the only person who is taking advantage of that area. And I'd just like the proposer to deal with that point in her response, because it might move my vote to poor in relation to that particular area.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon the Deputy to respond.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to all those who have spoken during this debate. As I said in my opening speech, the panel encountered deep divisions on this issue of protection, both within the fishing industry and from islanders who are asking us to protect a public good, our public good, your public good. I think there are many in this assembly who have admitted in private or in public, like our Chief Minister, Deputy Farnham, has done in the past, that dredging destroys habitats. It's likened to cutting down an ancient woodland or virgin rainforest. Once it's damaged and destroyed, it's gone, and takes many generations, and only if that seabed is then protected, to flourish again. The amount of damage dredging creates just to harvest a few scallops is out of proportion. The environment doesn't have a voice, but we have heard from those that dive those areas, the scallop divers, and even Deputy Morell, that there is clear destruction. I find it particularly uncomfortable that there are members who have stated that they are environmentalists and yet have declared that they will vote in favour of a method that destroys the environment. Because this isn't an amendment asking you to vote against the fishing industry. Far from it. The panel are showing you that due to their hard work in scrutinising this piece of work, they are concerned that even though there is substantial evidence in these 5 areas that are sensitive habitats to protect, ones that we're obliged to protect as a signatory to the OSPAR Convention, Deputy Luce has clearly stated this is a short-term economic decision, trumping long-term viability of the fishing stock. This amendment will not stop fishers fishing or dredgers dredging in at least 73% of our waters. Fishing can be done sustainably. In the paper yesterday, there was a celebration that now locally caught lobsters can be sold commercially with Marine Stewardship Council eco status due to a local fisherman's innovation and hard work. This drive for sustainability should be celebrated, and one which consumers, which are the ones that keep any industry alive, are increasingly demanding. Scallops are no different. They can be harvested sustainably, and there is money available now to help pay fishers to transition, to move to sustainable practices or move away from the protected areas. I'm particularly surprised at Deputy Mezek's stance. Putting aside his shallow proclamation of being an environmentalist, he focuses on a just transition, but why is he ignoring the scallop divers who are also trying to make a living and finding it increasingly hard to find areas to dive for scallops that aren't damaged because of dredging? Why is he not willing to listen to their voices? This is why the panel is taking this amendment in parts, to help those who are struggling with the arguments at hand, for example, Deputy Balash. They are purely focusing on economics. But what about all the fishers that use a particular area and see their sustainable way of fishing being undermined? To help states members, I'm specifically talking about Part D or Part 4 when you come to vote, but this goes further than the specific areas under discussion today. The spillover effects are huge, and the panel heard from several fishers who have seen all types of fish or crustaceans fall in numbers. Their catch is falling in numbers. So we're seeing a declining catches in all species except scallops and spider crabs. Are we happy to overfish the scallops as well? The Minister says he increased MPAs in other areas. The panel understands the theory of clean lines for navigation, though Deputy Curtis points out a very good point, that it's not true, since Area D or 4 at the ECROs makes it much more complicated. The Minister, however, does not explain clearly how he decided to extend the area far out west of Gronay and southwest of St Brelard's Bay, as Deputy Curtis highlighted. Using the MPA assessment methodology, these areas were not considered as being in high value or priority to protect. These areas were not suggested by officers in the original allocation as they did not meet the threshold. It makes me think that the Minister is just fudging the numbers to bring it up to a percentage that seems acceptable for everyone rather than basing it on hard evidence. And even though he and Deputy Gorse keep saying about percentages, this is not about 30 by 30. This is not about 30 by 30. This is about quality. This is not what the panel is seeking in quantity for 30 and 30. In fact, on reflection, we probably should have made amendments to these areas the Minister has added, as Deputy Curtis suggested yesterday, as we can show the Assembly clearly we are not about a number for numbers' sake. We are for quality and evidence, and we believe that the original proposal was the right one, with its extensive, scientifically based methodology. with its extensive multi-criteria approach and assessment, where experienced officers who are highly trained in evidence gathering and analysis were obliged under their methodology to only make suggestions for areas to protect if they knew there was enough evidence to prove protection. They did not suggest the areas the Minister has added to keep an artificially high percentage. They suggested the areas we are discussing today and for what you will be voting on in a few minutes. This is why we specifically urge you, if nothing else, to support Part B or 2, because the evidence is there in the MSP itself, which shows a high density of mearl beds where fish and shellfish stocks can replenish to help the fishing industry at large. The Minister talks about the benefits of spillover, and this is exactly where it would happen. If this area remains unprotected, nearly 50% of Jersey's equivalent of a coral reef is left open to be destroyed, going completely against the precautionary approach set out in every document you turn to, from the MSP itself to the TCA agreement and OSPAR convention, and ultimately it will diminish the scallop population. What we are seeing is a grab and run mentality. And it's not like we haven't seen this before, because we've heard about it, about the oysters. We've all received letters from a number of acclaimed academics, both French and UK experts, that are also calling for protection, so I completely dispute Deputy Josef's stance in this regard. The relationship with the French has been brought up several times, and I recognise that this is a delicate balance because we are a small island and they are a powerful player in the European Union. Believe me when I say I'm very much aware of how loud the French can get, especially their fishers and farmers. Having lived at the heart of the EU for over 15 years, I've seen and navigated through, and often with my young children, huge protests, including burning tractors and tyres, gallons of milk flowing down the road, stinking rotten piles of fish, a lot of very angry men, running battles with police, projectiles being hurled, trying to get my children to school and making my way to work. I have lived through acts of violence. I've lived through these acts of violence, and I've lived amongst this, trying to just get by. This type of intimidation doesn't faze me. And it's been brought up a couple of times, and I want to put the record straight on this. The Minister's timeline to get the MSP from lodging to debate meant that the only time we could do any scrutiny was during the summer months. That is not what we wanted as a panel, because we understood, as the French fishing community pointed out, it was les grandes vacances. But this was the only time we were given when we had no wriggle room to help expand our engagement with the French. But we did receive representation and read their original inputs into the consultation process. And I'm increasingly finding that scrutiny is given very little room to do its job properly, and this is one example. So I refute the idea that we did not listen to the French, because we also were not given the time necessary to do that. Deputy Gore says it's all about politics. Yes, exactly. And this is why I'm raising it with the Assembly, so they're prepared. Jersey yet again could be used as a pawn, or a prawn, in a UK-EU battle where energy is much more important for both parties than Jersey's marine space and whether we want to use our sovereign right to protect it further. I recognise the hard work the Minister and his officers are doing to try and ensure Jersey is listened to, but this hasn't always worked. So why are we not locking in our most valuable habitats now? Deputy Luce has proposed Part 1, 2 and 3 of the amendment as needing further research before a decision to protect. This is what will happen if members don't support this amendment today. Yet there is huge obscurity in this, and I want to warn the Assembly and those fair-weathered environmentalists about this. The panel heard from Deputy Luce that the proposed further research has already started and will be finalised by October next year. However, he has not explained what methodology he will be using to assess what he finds. Will it be based on the same methodology as the original proposal? He already dismissed it once. So what extra criteria will be added? If he finds that there are sensitive and valuable habitats to protect in this area, the panel believes it's already there, but he has not committed to a date to make the decision for protection. This is the subject of the next amendment, and there needs to be a clear date before the end of his term that he makes a decision. The panel is concerned that this is a tool to push the decision down the road past the next elections, so he doesn't have to make it. The Minister should make a commitment to the Assembly and to the fishing industry on a date for decision. As we heard this from the fishing industry, and it is a key finding in our report, the delay of a decision on designation does not assist or provide certainty for any fishers, especially the dredgers. So what is clear, sir, is this vote is between short-term economic viability for a small number of fishers who use a method of fishing that destroys everything in its path. The Chief Minister even confirmed it. Deputy Morell even confirmed it. Also, like the scallop divers have confirmed it, versus protecting rich biodiverse habitats that would sustain the whole fishing industry long-term by building in resilience to stocks, while adapting to climate change, which brings wider benefits to the whole fishing industry and protection of the marine environment, a common good for all of us, for our island that is future-proofed. I therefore urge members to vote for all parts of the amendment, but specifically think about Part 2 and Part 4. Thank you.
May I ask a question of the...
Well, if it's a matter of clarification...
Well, clarification. The proposer described opponents to her a proposition as fair weather environmentalists. And I just whether or not she was referring to the French representations as being... Because she used a very provocative statement, and I just thought it should be at least explained, sir, if she would.
Are you prepared to clarify that statement? You don't. It's a matter for you whether you give way. No, there's no. If the deputy doesn't choose to give way, then that doesn't require clarification. Very well. You wish to take all of these paragraphs separately, deputy, and we'll take a standing vote unless anyone calls for the appel.
Have the appel, please.
The appel is called for. Very well. I'll ask members to return to their seats. The first vote is on Amendment 1. It relates to the area east of the Ecriho. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. That part of the amendment has been defeated. 15 votes pour, 27 votes contre, no abstentions. I ask the greffier to clear the voting and then to prepare the next vote. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. The voting is on paragraph 2 of the amendment. Which relates to the Ecriho and les enquêtes. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. That amendment has been defeated. 17 votes pour, 25 votes contre, no abstentions.
Is it possible at this stage to ask for the readout of the 17 against?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Not 17 against, there are 25 against on this particular one. You wish the contra votes?
So can we have all the votes?
Yes. Thank you, sir.
We have all the votes, please.
Yes.
Those members voting for the Conotava, St Clement, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Ayer, Gardner, Moore, Coles, War, Miles, Renouf, Jeune, Alex Curtis, Wilson and Andrews. And those members voting contre, the Conotava, St Helier, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter and Grouville, and Deputies Labby, Luce, Morel, Rob Ward, Farnham, Mezek, Osif, Balash, Scott, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Rose Binet, Miller, Howell, Tom Binet, Ferry, Kovac, Barbara Ward, and Owls, and the Connaught Arbor-St. one.
Come now to the vote on part 3 of the amendment, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. And if members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And that too has been defeated. 16 votes for, 26 votes contra, no abstentions. Come to part 4 of the amendment. Ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, ask the greffier to close the voting. And that too has been defeated. 19 votes for, 23 votes contra, no abstentions.
Can we have all the names, sir?
All the names.
Those members voting for the Connaught Arbor, St Clement, Grouville, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Ayer, Gardner, Moore, Balash, Coles, War, Miles, Renouf, Jeune, Alex Curtis, Wilson and Andrews. Are those members voting contre, the Connaught Arbor, St Helier, St Brelard, Trinity and St Peter, Deputies Labby, Luce, Morel, Rob Ward, Farnham, Mezek, Osif, Scott, Catherine Curtis, Eltham, Rose Binet, Miller, Howell, Tom Binet, Ferry, Kovac, Barbara Ward and Owls and the Connaught Arbor, St one.
Come now to the final part, part 5 of the amendment. I'll ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. And if members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. And again, that part has been defeated. 16 votes for, 26 votes contra, no abstentions. Very well. We now come to the second amendment. There is an amendment to this amendment, but in light of the observations made by the Minister, that will have to be taken separately as we go. So we begin with the second amendment, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Designate the existing paragraph as paragraph A, and after that paragraph insert the following. B, to request the Minister for the Environment to establish a framework, timeline and tracker for monitoring the implementation of the Jersey Marine Spatial Plan and for conducting any further research on areas remaining for inclusion in the Marine Protected Area Network.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. The Marine Spatial Plan is a wide-ranging document. This is what it looks like printed. I hope everyone's read every page, as I have. There is a comprehensive list of actions, 91 in all, found listed in the annex marked with which department or organisation is responsible for delivery. Interestingly, there are a range of organisations that have responsibility, including arm's-length organisations and external organisations like charities. There are many aspects of the Marine Spatial Plan which are aspirational and intended to provide a direction of travel rather than an immediate decision by the States Assembly. Officers have previously drawn a comparison between the MSP and the Carbon Neutral Roadmap in terms of its status as a document which provides this direction of travel. However, this is where the comparison ends, as the Carbon Neutral Roadmap provides a clear framework of delivery with specific timeline for actions and monitoring processes. This is not the case for the MSP, and this is why the panel has brought this amendment to request the Minister to develop a clear framework, timeline and delivery tracker. We don't want to see all this hard work end up in a document that sits on a shelf gathering dust, or for the Minister who holds overall accountability for the delivery of the MSP to have limited tools available to be able to shimmy others along in their responsibilities. This is about ensuring clarity and transparency. I understand that the Minister is wanting, has made the desire to support our amendment. And so I'd like to ask if no, doesn't matter. I would also like to also talk about the amendment to our amendment at this time, if that's possible.
You can, but obviously it would be sensible not to speak twice on exactly the same matter, and that will be raised as an amendment to the amendment, which you'll have an opportunity to answer.
Right, so therefore I urge the members to support this part of the panel's amendment as the Minister does. Thank you.
Is this amendment seconded?
Yes,
Now there's an amendment to the amendment lodged by Deputy Renouf, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
After the words Marine Protected Area Network, insert the words, with a final status to be assigned to areas undergoing such further research by the end of 2025, and with all subsequent amendments to the Marine Spatial Plan to be completed by the end of the Assembly's current term of office.
Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. So in bringing this amendment to the scrutiny panel's second amendment, I was conscious of one thing. I did not want those areas that have been put into the further research category to be kicked into the long grass. The scrutiny panel's amendment asks for a framework, timeline and tracker for monitoring for implementation of the MSP, for monitoring the implementation of the MSP and for conducting any further research on areas remaining for further research. And this amendment to the amendment concentrates on the second part of that, which is those the areas of further research. Without a timetable for implementation, the process could drag on, particularly given the political controversy that reclassifying those areas could create. And here I want to digress a little bit to counter one point that was made by the Minister during his speech earlier, where he talked about the areas in contention, the further research areas, as being only identified by a desktop survey. Of course, there was a desktop element to the work, but the data was ground truthed with towed cameras and image analysis. The map on page 87 shows how extensive that ground truthing was, even when the draft Marine Spatial Plan was published. So we know that there is Merle in some of those further research areas because of that, and the logic of the Minister's argument should surely be that the areas that have already been ground truthed with cameras should be protected. The proof exists for those parts of the further research areas at least. But he has chosen a different approach. The argument is that until we've ground truthed the entire area, in other words, until the entire area of that has been allocated for further research has been further surveyed, we're not going to protect it. In other words, until we know everything, we will do nothing. So that makes a timetable doubly important. If we're not going to do anything, even in areas where we've already identified Merle, because we haven't fully surveyed the area, then we need to get to work quickly. So I'm taking the Minister at his word. He says that because of their commercial importance, these areas of further research must be held to a higher standard than the rest of the MPA network. We must be absolutely certain, without a shadow of doubt, that they are indeed of high environmental value. Fair enough. Members have voted to endorse that approach, and I accept that verdict. But the implication is that there is an intention to resolve the final status of those areas. They are not intended to stay in limbo forever. Otherwise, there would be no point in doing further research. And the Minister confirmed this in response to written question 271. Where economic importance was great and the evidence base to protect these areas was less refined, it was decided to take out the areas from the MPA network until further research could be done to refine the boundary. So these areas were taken out until further research would confirm or not whether there are sensitive habitats present. After that, the intention is to make a decision on their final status. But there is a risk in this approach that was inadvertently revealed yesterday in the debate, or given added emphasis by a comment in the debate yesterday. Because on the one hand, the Minister says he is absolutely committed to protecting Merle and other OSPAR-threatened habitats. But on the other, he says that one of the reasons we cannot protect now is because we need to make sure that even if there is Merle present, we need to check that it is still living and hasn't already been destroyed by dredging. Think of that for a moment. What an Alice in Wonderland statement this is. We need to check that the areas we plan to protect haven't already been destroyed by dredging, and in the meantime, we'll carry on dredging and destroying Merle. We end up in the bizarre situation that if the dredgers get to an area before the survey cameras, it'll be marked as dead and no longer in need of protection. This is why we need to act fast. Otherwise, we end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy. What then is the timetable for the work to be done to ground truth the data? The Minister has said that the survey work should be complete by spring 2025. He further reported that data analysis will be conducted through the spring and summer of 2025, and elsewhere he's referred to by October 25. The Minister also reported that if sensitive habitat is found, then the recommendation will be to put the further research area back into the network. And he said that yesterday as well. In fact, he went further. He said that if the officer recommendation is to protect, he will protect, unambiguously. I'm grateful for that. So to summarise, all the work by officers to determine whether the further research areas are indeed sensitive habitats will be completed by the end of next summer. The data analysis will already have been done over the summer, meaning that a report should follow in short order, and the report will have a recommendation. That leaves two things for the Minister to do. First, he has to make a decision. Does he accept the officer recommendation? Well, we've already heard that that's not going to take very long because he's already committed to accepting the officer recommendation. So that follows immediately once the report is presented, it is given to him. Second, if areas are to be added back into the MPA network, he needs to take action to give effect to the decision. Now, in his answer to written question 271, the Minister declined to set a timetable for these two actions. Therefore, I've allowed 3 months, from October to the end of the year, for the Minister to come to a decision. That seems reasonably generous to me. Certainly, given that we should be acting as fast as we reasonably can to protect a habitat that we will definitely know is highly sensitive by that time. The second part of my amendment refers to the second part of the process, giving effect to the decision. There is actually a very quick way to do this that doesn't even require law drafting. It is to attach a condition to the fishing licenses of the affected boats. So that could give practical effect straight away. But the longer term and more solid approach requires a law change. This requires law drafting, but it is the simplest of law drafting. It will be done by amending the Sea Fisheries Trawling, Netting and Dredging Jersey Regulations 2001, which in turn derived from the 1994 Sea Fisheries Law. It's already been done to create the existing marine protected areas. So the process is well known. It is entirely routine. If the Minister wants to get a wiggle on, he could have the regulations sorted by the end of this term in office. So, Sir, my reasons for bringing this amendment is to bring a sense of urgency, first of all, and a sense of closure to the future, to the question of the future of the further research areas. There is only a point in doing further research if it leads to action. Either the further research areas have OSPAR-threatened habitats such as Merle, or they don't. If they do, they should be protected forthwith. If they don't, then they should be permanently removed from the MPA network, giving both Jersey and French fishing fleets the certainty they need. It helps no one to prolong the uncertainty. So I hope members will support this amendment to the amendment.
Is the amendment to the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
So may I ask a question of clarification about the amendment? It may just be me not understanding, but I've been in that position before and I don't mind saying it publicly. So the amendment says, with a final status to be assigned to areas undergoing such further research by the end of 2025, or some subsequent amendments. Are we referring to a timeline that the Minister would create, which could be any timeline, but any of those areas that have undergone the research then have to be allocated by 2025? Or are we saying that once that timeline has been agreed in terms of the part that the Minister is accepting, that all of the assignments have to be done by 2025? Is that therefore defining the timeline as being by the end of by that time in 2025? That question made sense to me. It may not have to many others. And I accept that.
Do you mean that it's the sites are designated piecemeal as and when they are identified, or final? There is a final stopgap.
Yes, that's exactly.
Is that what
Thank
you're
you. Thank you
asking?
for interpreting that so well, because I didn't think I understood what I meant.
Well, I think the natural consequence is that it could be either, but the final date is 2025. In other words, there's nothing to stop any designation taking place before that if the research is done. But if it is not done, then the designation needs to take place by the end of 2025. That's how I would interpret. And if I think Deputy Reniff is nodding that that's his interpretation of it as well.
Thank you, sir. My only concern is that if the research is not done by 2025, are we voting for something that says that areas have to be assigned by 2025? Because it seems, somewhat... I'm just getting myself confused, and I accept that, and I apologise to everybody. I just want to be clear on what I'm voting on.
I think all I can do is interpret what I think the amendment means. I think whether you think it has problems attached to that must be the subject of a speech if you wish to make one, Deputy. Deputy Scott, is this a request to speak?
This is another question about the interpretation of the amendment.
Right.
So it says, with a final status be assigned to areas undergoing such further research by the end of 2025. Then it says, and with all subsequent amendments to the Marine Spatial Plan to be completed by the end of the Assembly's current term of office. Could you please confirm we're not talking about all subsequent amendments to the Marine Spatial Plan, rather than amendments that arise from this particular bit of research? Because I'm a little confused, sorry, sir.
Well, strictly on the use of the words, it is all subsequent amendments, but it follows as a matter of parliamentary supremacy that this assembly cannot bind a subsequent assembly, and if a subsequent assembly wishes to put do different things, then the subsequent assembly can. So I'm not sure that in a sense, it may be an intention that the Marine Spatial Plan will become final, but the reality of it is that a new assembly can change it.
So thank you. So, sir, does that mean that that bit's probably a bit meaningless then?
It's not for me to say. It's
Okay.
meaningless.
Sorry, thank you, sir.
That would be necessary, but I think that is probably how I would interpret the effect of the words. Very well. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. As some others have already stated, this is a difficult matter to get right when you're both an environmentalist and you support the local fishing industry. I did vote against the previous amendments after very careful consideration, as it is imperative that our fishers accept the proposed changes. I have a few questions around timelines which would be relevant to this amendment, and of the aims of the Marine Spatial Plan, which I'd like the Minister to answer. And I apologise if this has already been mentioned and I've missed it. Firstly, is there an intention at some point to completely stop dredging, or to just increase the areas where dredging is not permitted? And if so, what will be the time frame that the Minister envisages?
And will the fishing industry be given plenty of time and support to adjust? Lastly, are there any definite plans for onshore processing facilities which could encourage sustainable fishing practices? And I'd be grateful if the Minister would respond to these questions. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Robble.
Thank you, sir. You know, I don't want to bring the conversation down, but we all talk about being environmentalists. I wonder whether being an environmentalist nowadays is just simply being more depressed about the world than those who aren't environmentalists because of where we are, and it is somewhat worrying at times. My question, and I need to go back to this because I need to know what I'm voting for, because it's not, I'm afraid it's not clear to me. I would ask the proposer and anyone else who speaks who might be able to answer it. The first part of this is being accepted to request the Minister for the Environment to establish a framework timeline and tracker for monitoring the implementation of the Marine Spatial Plan and for conducting further research areas remaining for inclusion. That makes sense. We can all agree with that. There's a timeline, research will be done, the implementation of the Marine Spatial Plan will be adopted. But then the amendment says, with a final status to be assigned to areas undergoing such further research by the end of 2025. Now, if the Minister, this is my concern, that we may be voting for something that really will have no effect, and we're wasting our time. And that's the wrong words, because I want to try and be positive about this, which is that if the research isn't undertaken by 2025, there's no outcome, so therefore you won't designate anything. If a proportion of the research is undertaken by 2025, then you can apportion an assigned area to say, yes, this has been found and we're going to assign an area for good reason. But that's pretty obvious to me, so that's what's going to happen anyway. Whenever one undertakes to conduct further research on areas, whether they should be in the Marine Spatial Plan, you would then, sir, just let me finish because I'm really confused. Honestly, I'm not being no, I am confused. Sorry, sir. I lost it then. If research is going to be undertaken before any Marine Spatial Plan adds new areas, then it just makes sense that's going to happen anyway. And so what I would say is I'm worried about, I might be in a position that I could vote for this, or I could vote against this, and it would make absolutely no difference to what's going to happen. And I think I should have asked this question before, but I've got to be honest, sir, there's so much to read, there was so much to go through, so many areas, and I'm quite proud of the fact that I understood the areas, to be quite frank, and what was going on. I know more about Merle than I really want to. And perhaps more about fishing stocks, sir. But I think we need to be really careful about what this actually means, and perhaps the Minister can interpret this for us. Because, as I say, we've talked a lot about being environmentalists, and there's been a lot of suggestion about that, but we don't want to vote for something thinking we're doing something when actually we're not, or we can vote for it. It's just that detail in it, sir. I'm not critical of the amendment. I understand where it comes from, and I understand the timeline. I completely agree that we need timelines. It seems that the ministers accept there will be a timeline. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Deputy Luce, wish to speak at this time?
Yes, thank you,
yes,
if I could, please, sir. Thank you, sir. Before I start, I'd just like to address Deputy Curtis's questions about dredging. I think that's probably best addressed in the summing up to the whole plan, if that's possible, and not under the specific amendment. So I'm grateful to be able to do that then. Sir, while the rationale for Deputy Renouf's amendment to hold the MPA timeline within this term of government is clear, it's also putting me under a lot of pressure should it be adopted. And I say that for this reason. Good work takes time. Time to research, report, consider, and once again that word consult. Time to notify, socialise the changes, time for users to adapt their business practices. The report from scrutiny has highlighted the rapidity of the development of the MSP. And do we want to hold ourselves committed to rushing its implementation now we've got as far as we have? I don't believe that Deputy Renouf's amendment to the amendment will significantly improve or hasten full implementation of the plan. However, I do believe it may seriously jeopardise the stable implementation of the priorities set out in it. I would therefore recommend that members vote against this amendment to the amendment. And I'm only going to speak once in the second amendment debate, so I'll go on to address, if I may, sir, the original amendment from scrutiny, which I am happy to support. And while it's not been possible to produce the requested framework, timeline and tracker in advance of this debate, I can assure members that I have already set the Marine Resources team to this task and that the plans will be published this winter. That said, I would highlight yet again that consultation has to be key, and the plan, as approved so far, is a middle ground built on hundreds of sets of data sets that have come back from the consultation. The delivery framework for it must also engage the island's population, and especially those who are directly impacted, to ensure we deliver the viable set of outcomes that we've agreed so far. So I would ask the Assembly to vote with scrutiny on this one. The timeline set by Deputy Reynolds is just a little bit too tight, but I have already said I will have come back with the timeline, the task and the plans will be published this winter to show how I will progress this work next year. The research is going to happen during the summer and I will be receiving reports in the autumn. But to say it's got to be done in 25 is just pushing me a little bit too hard. There is a plan in place. I agree with the scrutiny amendments and I would urge members to do the same.
Deputy Scott.
So you helped me establish that the word, and with all subsequent amendments to the Marine Spatial Plan to be completed by the end of the Assembly's current terms of office, may, that a subsequent Assembly can make a different decision. And I'm coming to the conclusion that a subsequent Assembly can make a decision that the final status isn't final. So my position on these words is that, and I don't, because I know that the bringer of this proposition sometimes use the term nonsense, and I don't think it's respectful, and I don't intend to use it, but they really aren't going to really aren't capable of holding this minister, handcuff him in this particular way. And I think the thing that is really important is that we do have scrutiny, and that scrutiny carries on, holding the minister to account, as it should, to ensure that things are done promptly and as they can, and that if there are reasons for delay, that they are examined, and that protest is made where it's reasonable. I think what this amendment is trying to do is force an issue, and I do understand the desire to get things done. Honestly, when it comes to government, the pace of things and progress can be frustrating for all of us. But I don't feel I can support this proposition, because basically it doesn't really mean much, and really it's trying to almost do scrutiny's job for them without doing their job. Thank you.
Well, Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And I think we're all glad that the comments on this amendment to the amendment are briefer than perhaps to the first amendment. And the Assembly has legitimately made a decision with regard to 5 areas and 5 votes in the first amendment. And what Deputy Reniff here is asking for, in my understanding, is quite simple. And as an Assembly, we can sometimes tell, and there's a mood within the Assembly where mountains are being made out of molehills. The exact linguistics used within a proposition, and it is important, I hear uttered across the room, but the funny thing is the dice fall on either side depending on who's looking to create an argument sometimes, and for me the wording here is clear. With a final status to be assigned to areas undergoing such further research. And so I take that to mean, turning to page 127 of the MSP, there are 6 areas hashed in yellow, with the key to the chart being area of research for future marine protected area designation. Members voted on 5 of those earlier. The 6th was a small amount of rocks just north of Gredlech, I think around the... and so members will have a clear guide as to which areas are those of further research. This isn't an ambiguous definition about surveying the entire of Jersey's marine habitat. I take nodding from Deputy Reniff to be clear that he is referring specifically to the wording in the Marine Spatial Plan. And then the question about the timeline, well, the Minister has confirmed that the work will be undertaken and that he will have evidence and report by autumn, but consultation must take place. And I would just reiterate that the Minister has said that he will protect areas where this strong evidence comes forward. And the need for consultation on this, I would suggest, is something he should be doing in parallel about how to support the dredging fleet right now to understand that should these areas need to be designated, that he is in the position to do so. And lastly, to turn to the timeline, if the Minister felt there was a slightly more feasible timeline to be held to account, it would have been within his right to amend this and to suggest instead of by the end of 2025, by February 2026. He hasn't dismissed the principle of a timeline, and that's important. We see many states' propositions come forward. Many of them, some of the best, will easily be measured against something like a SMART criteria, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I think that is all we are asking for those who wish to support this, is a time-bound piece of work. We've already debated, and in oral questions, the Minister has faced questions about the deliverability of requests made by the Assembly on him, which include time limits, not least that of a development levy proposition brought by Deputy Kovac, which specified a timeline. And we hear sometimes that timeline slip, and that ministers, the Assembly isn't always angry at ministers when a timeline slips. They just ask for a rationale, they ask for justification, but that process of governance enables the Assembly to hold to account decisions by ministers. And I think, frankly, the evidence we have from the Minister that surveys are being undertaken, that he will have report, makes this both specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-bound, and so I shall be supporting the Deputy's amendment.
Thank you, sir. My scepticism about government interference in fishing, I have to say, continues to weigh on my mind. This, sir, is once again a matter that needs the buy-in from the fleet, and in fact it has to have that if it is to be successful and to work. Imposing timelines may be of value, and I understand Deputy Reniff's motivation in bringing it, but we must consider those who may have made commitments financially beyond the end of 2025, and indeed whether the department will have sufficient resource at its disposal to get the work done in the proposed time. Personally, I find it difficult to support this particular amendment, as I can't be confident that the industry can be aligned with the proposed timeline at this particular juncture. I won't therefore be supporting this amendment. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Chair.
Thank you, sir. I feel that this, as Deputy Curtis has eloquently said, a mountain out of a molehill. This amendment focuses solely on the areas that the Minister has already designated, calling for more research to be done. Not new areas, but areas that they've already identified through evidence-based that there could be something there. Unfortunately, and I understand the will of the Assembly, we lost the scrutiny panel lost the argument in the last amendment to say there was actually evidence there. But there is an idea there's evidence there. Otherwise, why would there be these areas just asking for more research to actually confirm that there is a need to protect? And therefore, I don't understand why the Minister is feeling that he does not want to support this amendment to have a clear timeline and a deadline on making that decision. Otherwise, as I've said before in my last speech, it looks like this idea of further research is a way to hide behind, to not actually make any decision and push it not only into the next elections, so it could be another development environment minister to make that decision, but also potentially to never make a decision. And so I think, and as the scrutiny panel heard, this actually lack of actually having a timeline is actually detrimental also for the fishers and for the fishing industry and for the dredgers. And that's something that we heard specifically as a scrutiny panel, that they need to have a deadline, not only for this, for understanding once evidence is in place, that evidence actually shows there needs protection. Consultation depends what you understand as consultation. I would take this as discussions about how to transition fishers once there's knowing protection area, to transition and support them away from those areas that then would be designated as being for protection. But the Minister has already in his hearing, in his letter and now in his speech, outlined a particular time frame that is feasible, that sits comfortably within this time frame that this amendment Deputy Renouf has brought. And I'm really surprised the Minister has not brought it, has not accepted it. The Minister has already told us as a scrutiny panel that there's drop cameras already in place, extra drop cameras already in place in these areas this summer to start gathering data. So data has already been collected over this summer. And this will continue into summer 2025, with it all being finalised by October 2025. This gives the Minister plenty of time before his end of term to be able to make a decision on whether he will designate further areas or not. Because as the Minister said in his hearing, as data becomes available, we will act. But we're not hearing how he will act. He is not defining what action he will take, and not accepting this timeline means that as scrutiny panel and as myself are very concerned that actually it's using the guise of further research to push decisions further down the line without making a decision whether to protect or not. So I urge States Assembly members to support this amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Very well. Those in favour of the amendment kindly show.
Call for the appel. Oh, no response.
Sorry?
I haven't heard a response yet, sir.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I'm getting confused as to whose amendment this is. I apologise.
Any others?
Yes, I'm not sure that. I'm not sure I'm completely alone in that. Yes. Does any other member wish to speak on the Deputy Coles?
Thank you, sir. So I just wanted to follow on what Deputy Jean was saying about certainty and requirement of certainty for all involved in this area. One of the contributions we had to the scrutiny review said that we are very good as an assembly of making plans but very poor at following through. And I think this is why a lot of, especially backbench propositions to this assembly, come with a timeline attached, so we can hopefully see the results of what we'd like to achieve. And so this is why I would be supporting Deputy Renouf's proposition to bring in this timeline, because we do need to provide all people involved in this area with certainty, fishers or the environmentalists. And we also need to ensure that our plans that we make within this assembly are actually followed through upon. So, sir, I urge members to support this amendment to the amendment.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Renouf to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I'm grateful to all members who contributed, and particularly to Deputy Jean and Deputy Alex Curtis, who certainly understood the spirit and purpose of the amendment that I'm bringing. and provided helpful clarification. I think in terms of the meaning of the amendment, I think, as people have said, it's a bit of a mountain out of a molehill. It says that with a final status to be assigned to areas undergoing such further research by the end of 2025. The further research areas are known as the further research areas. That's how they are referred to. It is quite clear to what they refer. They're mentioned in the Marine Spatial Plan, as Deputy Alex Curtis says. So that is to what it refers. I've used the phrase that is used by the Marine Spatial Plan to describe them. So there is no ambiguity about that. And then it says, with all subsequent amendments to the Marine Spatial Plan to be completed by the end of the Assembly's current term of office, and Deputy Ward didn't quite understand whether that was covering everything to do with the Marine Spatial Plan. Well, in one sense, I suppose, the Marine Spatial Plan will be voted on today anyway, and these are the only outstanding matters, potentially, but no. The amendment actually says all subsequent amendments to the Marine Spatial Plan, and that means subsequent to the decisions that have been referenced in the previous part of the amendment. So the amendments that subsequent amendments to the Marine Spatial Plan is the amendments subsequent to the decision which we have been asking for, which the amendment asks for. Deputy Scott argued that this doesn't mean much, because a new assembly can always make a different decision. Well, it can. A new assembly can change anything. Everything we do in this assembly is conditional. Everything is provisional. Everything can be changed by future decisions. It's no different in that respect to anything that we do. But it does make a decision for the time being. That's the point. We make decisions until they're rescinded or in other ways countermanded. The point is, it makes the decision for now. And that's all this amendment to the amendment is attempting to do. Deputy Wood also questioned what would happen if the work wasn't finished. Well, I was quite careful about that because I did put in written questions to find out how long the work would take. The scrutiny panel also wrote a letter to find this out. The answer was the same. The work is already underway. It's expected to be, the survey work to be finished by spring, summer. And as I said, also, there was one answer the Minister gave that referred to October. So the timeline is pretty clear. It's been laid out by the Minister. A lot of the work has already been done. It's underway now. I believe the boats are actually out today. And it allows some wiggle room by saying the end of the year. The Minister's main argument was that it's just a bit too tight. But I would respectfully suggest that the timeline already outlined by the Minister makes clear that whilst it may require some getting down to work pretty quickly, it is not too tight. It is achievable. It's achievable if we want to achieve it. And I would say that the argument in favour of that, gaining that clarity as soon as possible, is a compelling one. It just asks for the decisions to be taken and the actions to be taken. I note there was no challenge to the argument that the legislative change is relatively simple. So I take it that that part of what I've said, the second part, in other words, of my amendment, is accepted. There is not going to be a huge delay in putting this amendment putting these changes into effect once the Minister has made his decision. And remember, there's 5 months allowed in that schedule for that law drafting and that to happen, even though it is very, very simple. I think it was the Constable of St. Brillard who said that on the one hand, it won't speed things up much, but on the other hand, it will cause problems. And I kind of couldn't quite understand, if it wasn't going to speed things up much, how it could cause a lot of problems. But the final point I would say is the point about consultation. And of course, I would emphasize the point here that Deputy Alex Curtis said. Consultation is already underway. Consultation can be underway concurrent with the work. The work is ongoing. Research results are coming back all the time. We already know where some of the merle is. We knew it before the draft Marine Spatial Plan was published, there are areas that had already been towed cameras, drop cameras, and so on. So it is an emerging picture. It's a building picture all the time. There is plenty of consultation that can happen before the final full stop is put on the work. So I see no significant impediment to making this timetable stick. I don't think a compelling argument has been advanced against it. And I very much hope that members will support this to give some structure to the ongoing work that's being done and give us all, fishers, conservationists, ministers, the Assembly, and the public who've written to us about this, give them some sense of when this will be resolved. Thank you, sir.
Right. We call for the appel. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on Deputy Brown's amendment to the second amendment, and I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, and I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated, 16 votes pour, 20 votes contre, no abstentions.
Can we have them all, sir?
Those members voting for the Connotab of St Mary and Deputy Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Gardner, Moore, Balash, Coles, War, Miles, Renouf, Jern, Kovac, Alex, Curtis, Wilson and Andrews. Those members voting contre the Connotab of St Helier, St Brillard, Trinity, St Peter, St Clement, Grouville, St Saviour and St Juan. And Deputies Labby, Luce, Morell, Ayer, Rob Ward, Farnham, Mesick, Ozef, Scott, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Rose Binet, Miller, Hal, Tom Binet, Ferry, Barbara Ward and Alves.
Very well, we now return to debate on the second amendment. Does any member wish to speak on the second amendment? Very well. Those in favour of adopting the second amendment kindly show. Those against? The second amendment is adopted. We now return to the main debate. Does any member wish to speak on the main proposition? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure, like myself, many people were very daunted when you started seeing the size of the Jez Marine Spatial Plan as it dropped into our inboxes or Teams or however you managed to get a copy of it. So I just wanted to make a couple of comments and observations that the plan isn't simply just about the marine protected areas, but actually they just became a very dominant political item within it. I'm only sort of raising points about other parts and potential new policies within it, because there is actually a petition on the State Assembly website, and I know the public sometimes will think we ignore these electronic petitions, even though we will be having an in-committee debate on another subject soon. The subject that it comes up with is mentioned within the MSP. It was about dogs on beaches. And like I say, I mention this because it is something that is of the public interest, and it is something that is contained within this document. That the MSP will at some point bring forward a policy to review dogs on beaches and how they should be applied, and whether or not the summer exclusion is still relevant. And I just basically want to make a comment on the record for the Minister and for any future ministers on this, that when we consider policies of dogs on beaches, we have to consider the wildlife in which we share these beaches with. We have a lot of migratory birds that come to Jersey at varying times of the year, that stop to rest during their migration, or they come to feed during winter before returning north. But yeah, simply my point is that when this policy comes forward, I would hope to see a balanced view of our use of our beaches, so dog owners can enjoy them all year round, but also the resting birds have a chance to rest and nest in peace. So those are my comments, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Any other member wish to speak on the main proposition? Deputy Jeune.
Thank you, sir. And I rise as the chair for the Environment, Housing, Infrastructure panel. The concept of a marine spatial plan is a simple one. It is a way of providing a direction of the marine space. It is a way to outline what the balance should be between activities and industry and the environment, and at the same time ensure its sustainability for future generations. The concept may be simple, but that balance is not, and the challenges raised are reflected in the EHI's scrutiny panel review report and in the submissions made to the panel. The panel's task was to review whether the Minister of the Environment had hit the right note with that balance that islanders need to strike. It also examined whether international best practice had been followed, including for the consultation and engagement part, and that there was alignment with neighbouring jurisdictions. We've spent some time today and yesterday debating the areas where the panel felt the balance hadn't been struck. But overall, the MSP is a wide-ranging document which represents a huge amount of work over a number of years for the officers who put it together and who facilitated the consultation and research that was necessary. One point the panel noted was that due to the aspirational nature of the document, it contains potentially contentious issues, as Deputy Coles raised just now, that have not yet caused public comment in the way that marine protected areas have done. I would urge members, if they haven't, to acquaint themselves with the document, like you do with the Bridging Island Plan, for example, or the Carbon Neutral Roadmap, as many elements will be passed through the States Assembly in years to come. It is clear that there is much to do to ensure this roadmap is implemented, with success lying with multiple stakeholders, continued dialogue, need for additional resources, and utilising tools that can help mitigate tensions, especially tensions that have played out in this Assembly in the last few days. One of the key findings of this review has been the hard work and passion of all those involved, from the marine resources officers who developed and produced the report, to the fishers who provided detailed information about the jobs they do and what this plan means for them, and I thank them for their dedication. However, the panel and its external advisors examined whether there could have been a way to develop the marine protected areas separately from the plan, the Marine Spatial Plan, both in order to avoid the dominance of the issue that we have experienced and to have a longer consultation period that could have developed a plan, a marine protected area plan, with more ownership. Their hands were tied, though, due to a States Assembly decision which may have jeopardised more participatory approach to try and mitigate conflict over the shape and scope of the protected areas. As it is a large piece of work, our review reflected that, and the panel has made 35 findings and 17 recommendations. I won't dwell on them, you'll be glad to know, now, as members have the review in front of them. However, there are a few key recommendations that should be highlighted. The objectives of the Marine Spatial Plan should be reframed to provide a clearer flow of government intent from vision through to actions in an updated iteration of the MSP to be provided prior to any next island plan debate. A clearly articulated set of anticipated outcomes and indicators to measure them should be developed to provide more clarity of the benefits of the MSP. The Minister should give clear timelines on delivery of the full economic impact assessment, use sustainability appraisals to objectively assess the economic, social and environmental sustainability of this plan. And as a priority, the Minister should provide clarity on the development of fisheries management planning and must support industry to explore sustainable fishing methods. And finally, the Minister should investigate models for participatory engagement for all future iterations of MSP so that development promotes ownership of the scheme for all stakeholders. So with that, I would like to thank everyone who answered the call for evidence, provided submission, and to those who took the time to meet with the panel. We did hear you. The panel also hired independent advisors with huge experience in this area to help the panel through its reviewing of this complex process, and we would like to thank them for their assistance. And as it's the panel's first major review since forming, post the VONC, I would like to thank my fellow panellists for their time, energy and analysis in building our report. I know that, as a collective, we are proud of the review that we have produced, and with that, I would like to thank the panel's officers for their dedication in getting the report across the line. We look forward to the response from the Minister regarding our findings and recommendations, and will continue to monitor the implementation as part of our wider scrutiny role in 2025 and beyond. Thank you.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I rise to support this final amended or partly amended proposition. But in doing so, I would say and remind ministers of all of that share the responsibility for this, the Sustainable Economic Development Minister, the Environment Minister, External Relations, that in progressing and implementing this plan, it is absolutely essential that Jersey maintains its relationship with our French neighbours. As I described when I visited France and went on TV and other things to try and rebuild our relations with France that were fractured, broken, and difficult, I said that we were cousins in my case actually, and familial reasons, but we are cousins. We are not England, and we have historically regarded France as the mainland. Certainly that's what it was called in my household, and we can of course speak in this assembly in the French language. It is crucial that in adopting this plan that we maintain those relationships, that we maintain, as some members, even in the Reform Party, which I commended, that we take the fishers, both the Jersey fishers and the French fishers, with us. And I'm not sure at all whether there has been a sufficient amount of effort made to deal with the reality that it is true that one of the reasons why our fishing fleet, which is small in economic contribution to the island, but culturally important, and other members have said that they couldn't imagine the island without a fishing industry. And certainly the importance of the catch being permitted under this plan, being eaten on tables in Jersey, both at the household, but also the increasing number and welcome number of restaurants who are now celebrating the fishing sector. I know 1 or 2 new restaurants are doing so. It's vital that we consider the economic implications of the controls that we put in, and that we take people with us. The reality is, though, that since Brexit, our fishers have been saddled, have been burdened with a whole load of paperwork, a whole load of administration. That means there are different rules for the French fisherman who fishes in the waters permitted, controlled or otherwise, or changed by this marine spatial plan, but there isn't a level playing field in relation to the ability for a Jersey fisher to land a identical twin lobster or scallop or whatever in France, which is the major market. And there's been a lot of talk recently in this assembly about the importance of improving our relations with France. I'm not sure it's going to do anything with the cost of living, but a French supermarket would be nice. And of course, having alternative supply lines. We have to work at these relationships, and we should not destroy those relationships. And I have to say that it is absolutely vital, as both the implementation of now this agreed, hopefully, marine spatial plan and its further evolutions, which has been the subject of an amendment, that the government and those actors within it actually do some real work and get their officials to do some real work and effort to liaise, to talk with, to understand the perspective of the French fishers. Because I believe, there was a senator in this assembly who used to say that you get more with sugar than vinegar. And it is not by a haughty Anglophone approach that you get the buy-in at all the levels of the French administration, regional, national, EU, to resolve issues like the much needed, and frankly I lament the lack of progress on it, the sanitary inspection port in Granville. If our fishing industry is to survive, they have to have access to French markets. And so it's all very well us talking about the importance of sustainable fishing, and it's all very well and fine, I support this, but at the end of the day, the seas around these islands are a resource and an economic resource, and they are a foodstuff, a valued food staple that can be enjoyed by more people sustainably. But effort has to be made to make that fish and the fish that is able to be fished on an equal playing field. And I use this, maybe I'm stretching at the purposes of the remarks, but they are absolutely fundamental. We will not have a fishing industry to control in the future with a marine spatial plan if we don't have a fishing industry. And it is dwindling, it is falling, and I distance myself from those remarks to saying that the French that I have met are in any way aggressive, like we see the portrayal of perhaps French farmers, etc. I don't think that they are making their views known in that sort of aggressive way. They didn't when I was on the boat with them when they arrived in the Normandy harbour. They were genuinely concerned, and I believe that they were unfairly treated. And history has shown that we fixed that. But it is by dialogue that we fixed it, and it is by dialogue that we will continue to have a good, plentiful sea stock with this marine spatial plan being implemented. And I hope members are not cross with me for repeating what I have said on many occasions, that relationships with France are not to be underestimated as their importance, because they matter to our history and they can matter to our future. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Tadier.
Thanks. So I'll take advantage also of the fact that we've got no clock anymore. Timer.
If it assists, Deputy, I write the start time every time someone speaks.
Thank you.
Right.
And I knew by getting to my feet the clock would mysteriously start working again. We're obviously talking about the spatial plan in the wider context now, and it's already been quite wide-ranging, and I don't necessarily want to increase that wide range of topics that we're talking about. What I will say, it was touched upon on some of the contributions in the amendments, was that we won't be judged on the success of this plan in the next few months or in the next year. It might feel like one side or another in this debate has won a victory. My concern is that it may turn out to be a Pyrrhic victory, not for either side or any of us in here, but it might be something that we pay for later on and rue at our leisure, because the success of this spatial plan and the way it has or hasn't been amended today, I think will be judged in 30 or 50 years' time when the historians start writing, perhaps on Geripedia or in the other books that they're writing about. And they will. We have to wait and see what they're going to say about today. Was it a missed opportunity, or was it actually something that was done wisely? What I would say is that more generally, and we've touched on it before, sir, is that we've talked about issues to do with the French, the European markets. We have to put this in a wider context of Brexit. We know that Brexit didn't deliver. I don't think for those who voted for Brexit, they were expecting one thing. I would suggest that they got another. We know that here in the Channel Islands, we didn't get a say in that. I think there was a promise to fishermen elsewhere that voting for Brexit would restore the sovereignty of their territorial waters, and it seems to have done exactly the opposite. And here in Jersey, we're finding that we have, for a long time, had a shared space in that market, but there isn't, and in those waters, but there isn't an equality of arms when it comes to the Jersey fishers and the French. Simply, not just in the fact that we can't. It would be nice if we could simply say, there's a line. This is our water, this is where we fish, that's your water, that's where you fish, but there are historically shared fishing rights. But we know, of course, that technology advances and that the technology and the size of boats that are available to European and French fisheries are far of a higher magnitude than is available in Jersey. So whilst we might be seeking to protect a small number of larger boats that exploit in the literal sense or in the in the industry sense, those fisheries. I think it's a bigger issue about the fish stocks going forward. What also fascinates me when it comes to our food markets and food sustainability, that's something we definitely need to be mindful of. We're mindful as a scrutiny panel that the word sustainable appeared recently in economic development. I'm not sure that we're necessarily seeing much sustainable economic development coming forward. That remains to be seen. And Jersey, traditionally, as an administration of its government or the Assembly, has taken a very scattergun approach to food security, I would argue, and to autonomy in terms of its production. And if I can bring up one example that's always fascinated me, is that because on the one hand, a lot of things that the Assembly or government has done previously varies between being very free market, sometimes it's neoliberal, other times it's very paternalistic. And one of those examples of paternalism that we see in other parts of the market is the dairy industry that we have in Jersey. So it is impossible, or illegal rather, to import other milk to Jersey other than, it's not possible to buy anything other than Jersey milk in supermarkets unless it's a particularly niche type of milk that might be omega-3 enriched, for example. We've seen that certain brands, you'll know what I'm talking about, are available, but there's a protectionism that exists in the dairy industry that doesn't exist in the fishing industry. And we've heard all sorts of comments that being made about Jersey fish versus French fish. You only need to go into the big supermarkets or the big supermarkets that we have in Jersey to know that there are fish that come not just from France or Jersey, but from pre-packaged sources all around the world, not just in the UK. And we do have to start questioning, I think, the carbon footprint that comes with that, the sustainability of those practices, and actually ask if there's any appetite to start to promote our own local produce like we've done for the dairy industry. I'm not saying it would necessarily be easy, but it's interesting that somebody somewhere along the line decided to protect the dairy industry, to protect the milk that we consume in the island, but no thought has been given about how we might do that for other produce, and to actually say that, first of all, we should be producing for our own island, good quality, organic, sustainable, in all those ways which we should be promoting, not simply being left to bob up and down, for want of a better expression, although it might be appropriate, and be influenced by the waves and the winds that come from the north or the west or the south, and those big economies over which we don't have control. So I think it is important to make sure that we take control of the things that we do have as an island. I think it's important that we don't necessarily panic when it comes to some of what we have been hearing about the real politic, because I don't share the same worries, I think, that others might feel in that regard. And I think we do need to step up and control what we can and not worry so much about what we can't control.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to speak, but Deputy Tadier had mentioned the subject of how we might support the fishermen, and it is a subject that I very much hope that I, and I'm sure the Minister for Sustainable Development, will want to work with Deputy Tadier in his role as chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel. The idea of the introduction of protectionism is an interesting one. I think that that's something that one can explore. The most important thing is that we keep these conversations going. How can we support this industry? What pride should we be taking in our local produce, and how might it be better supported? Bearing in mind all the other things that come into play about the cost of food and how we still want to keep the cost of living down. So I just wanted to let him know that I am listening. I might not always look like I am, but I am.
Does any other member wish to speak in the main debate? Deputy Rob Ward.
Just very quickly, so I note, as we're talking about the wider policy itself, one thing, and I can agree with Deputy Tadier, which is about us having control. It mentions a wind farm. I'm a supporter of wind power. I think I'm also an acceptor of climate change being real. I understand there is a sort of move from some loud voices where climate change doesn't exist. I believe it does. It's really not aliens and volcanoes that's caused it. There's good science behind it. And I think wind power is not only intrinsic to our power needs long into the future, but it's something we should have more control over. And I would like Jersey to have a much larger control over whatever is developed, rather than simply selling the seabed. So I want to put that on record now, and I think that is something that could be utilised way into the future for our children and our children's children, as I was mentioned before. And on that note about children, I'd like to point out that when I look at the consultees, there is an area which could be used in our schools to get across what this spatial plan means and to get feedback, which are school councils. They are within all of our schools, and the young people involve themselves very well, sir. Indeed, sir, I'm going to mention St Saviour's School, where I recently went and met their government set up. They have their entire government set up. Indeed, so I met their bailiff, I met their greffier of the states, and our chief minister is not there at the moment, but I met their chief minister, and indeed they were all very impressive. I will not compare how impressive they were, sir, certainly not, but they were extremely impressive in the way they did. I attended one of their Council of Ministers meetings, and I have to say their level of organisation focus was really very impressive indeed, and I think we can all learn from it. But that is a really good source of feedback from young people where this spatial plan will affect long into the future. And so I urge the Minister and those officers that are involved that there is a way to engage there, and can certainly enable that within schools, sir, because I think that's a very important thing to do. Just that's all I want to say, sir.
Much indeed. Deputy Levy.
Yes, thank you, sir. I haven't yet spoken, and I just want to make two brief points which I don't believe have been made so far. I'm grateful that we've had the debate today, because I feel it's allowed us to consider all aspects of the environment and our community as a whole. In the last assembly, some of us had great difficulty in choosing or debating and deciding on the marine spatial plan versus a marine spatial park. And now there's a big difference here, and we've just seen it today, because the marine spatial plan, as we agreed upon, thankfully, allows us to consider aspects that are right for Jersey, right for our community. And I believe we have done that today. We've listened to all the arguments and we've come to our conclusions. And the other brief point I wanted to make was, let's not lose sight of the fact that the protected areas at the moment are 6%. 6%. And today they will be going up to 23%. So I think that is a win. It's a win for the environment, and it's a win for our fishing community. And it means we can go forward to get to the 30%. We heard the Minister yesterday. I was tuned in for some of the time. Unfortunately, I wasn't actually in the Assembly. Say that it is his aim, and he will be achieving 30% by 2030. So I think that's what we have got to work to, in a very balanced approach, and taking everybody with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak in the main debate? Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. So I do want to rise to speak, because the MSP was initiated when I was Minister. And I do want to put on record that I think it is a tremendous piece of work. I was very proud to take it on and to put into effect a state's decision came through the Bridging Island Plan to have a marine spatial plan. The previous Assembly asked that we put it in place by the end of 2025, and we should in large measure meet that, with the exception of the further research areas. I want to thank the Minister for sticking with it, and for all the work he has put into bringing the plan to fruition. But I also want to put on record my thanks to the officers who have worked and continue to work so hard. It was a pleasure for me to work with them, And I will repeat what I said when I was a minister, which is that the Marine Resources team is a jewel in the crown of the government. They are internationally respected, and we should be very proud of the work they do, which they do with a real passion. Just as a minor counterweight to Deputy Joseph's comment, I would say that yes, of course we need to engage with the French, but we also do need to stand up for our own interests, which are not always identical to French interests. Consult, discuss, negotiate, but do it with a clear knowledge that the French do not have a veto, and we are obliged to protect the environment. The Marine Spatial Plan is a huge leap forward. It puts a fresh focus on our marine environment, which is such a vital part of our jurisdiction. When we look at the island, we think we all know the shape of the island, and we do. We know the shape of it. We could probably draw it quite accurately. But what the Marine Spatial Plan does is focus on a different spatial area, which includes the seas, and it's a very different shape. It's constrained by the borders with France and Guernsey and so on. So, one of the things is that perhaps we will become more familiar with that shape and thinking of that as Jersey, as well as the land area and the reefs and the offshore reefs. The Marine Spatial Plan is built on a terrific evidence base. Everything in it is evidenced and reported, and it was quoted at the time when the draft came out that it was a good example of the kind of evidence base and the kind of reporting on that evidence base that we should do more of. The Marine Spatial Plan is also a recognition that we have to manage the marine environment. There are conflicting interests, not just to do with fishing, and the plan gives us a guide as to how we can start resolving those conflicts. But overall, I want to say that it is a massive advance. I'm encouraged that we have widespread agreement that Merle is important and that dredging damages it. The disagreement, it seems to me, is over how quickly we move. The Minister has unambiguously committed to support officer recommendations where Merle and other threatened habitats are identified. And I think that I welcome that commitment. It's important. I hope that not too much is lost before we're able to put in place further protection. And I hope also that the time we have, whilst further research is done, is used to think about how we help that part of the fishing industry that fishes, depends on fishing in Merle beds and other sensitive areas to help transition away from that. That would be a real win. So my closing remark is to say that I hope that we endorse this Marine Spatial Plan fully and think about how we can use it going forward. It is a really good way to think about our marine environment.
Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond. Minister, how long do you think you will be?
I'll be as quick as I can, sir, given the time. I think even if we go over slightly, I think it's right that I conclude now and not come back after lunch.
Yes, well, in which case, Minister, please do.
Thank you, sir, and I will be as brief as I can, but I don't want to do any disservices to this plan because, as Deputy Renner said, it's a really, really good document and it needs to be spoken about. Where do I start? So I'd like to start with scrutiny. I'll come back to them in a minute, but I do look forward to working with them on their recommendations and findings. It's my intention always to work with scrutiny as much as I can. I've chaired scrutiny panels in the past. I know how the system works. And I have to say, so that I'm disappointed that they felt pressed for time. I don't know the reason why that was. I certainly would have given them more time if I could, had I known. One of the things that was said was that I've been fudging the numbers, and I just want to say, sir, that Deputy Labby has pointed out, now she's just left, that the additional areas that in the southwest, which have been I've been accused of using just to big up the numbers, are there for a couple of reasons. One, they are to improve navigation, and they make no bones about that, but it does actually increase the diversity of the different habitats we have within the MPA. And while there's no merle there, and while there's no scallops there, there are windswept rock environments which host a diverse number of fish and shellfish and protect sea fans, which couldn't be very good. That's another run that needs protecting, and it's in that area. So I say to people, these extra areas that I created weren't done just for fun and to big up the numbers. Deputy Tadier mentioned that he thought I was more of an economic minister than an environment minister, but I would remind him some time ago when I was previously in this role, I banned bass fishing. I can assure him some of the stuff I received in my email box at that time would not have put me down as an economist at all. But I do need to answer Deputy Taddy in talking about a vision for the future. And my vision for the future is one where everybody is still involved, be that fishermen or be that the children, my children and grandchildren in particularly. And I'm minded to say, in answer to people who've spoken about children, Deputy Rob Ward, that one of the first pieces of consultation we did was with the Youth Parliament in 2023. Deputy Teddy mentioned management, and yes, management of fish stocks, whatever the species may be, whatever the métier may be, into the future is absolutely vital to a vibrant fishing community in the future. And one of the reasons we haven't been able to make too much progress thus far was that we didn't have proper control over our territorial waters, which we now do. We are now in a position to put management measures in stock to protect those species from the challenges that Deputy Renner has warned us about. Post-Brexit has not been easy for the fishing fleet. They know that only too well, and Deputy Ozif highlighted the challenges we've had, where it's not a level playing field created by two fishing boats, a Jersey boat and a French boat, fishing alongside each other, fishing the same species, using the same métier, whereas one boat can return to France and land that catch straight into the market. The other boat has to come into Jersey and face all the challenges that Brexit has put in our way when it comes to exporting onto the continent, which was what our markets were in those days. Deputy Coles mentioned dogs on beaches, and there were comments in the plan consultation responses, both in terms of disturbance to wildlife, but also in disturbance to beach users. And that, of course, was the reason that the rules on dogs on beaches were brought in the first place. However, it has become clear that there are effects of dogs worrying wildlife, particularly in the intertidal regions in the winter, where they're there for resting or for feeding. And I do have a team in the wildlife department looking at using the wildlife law to see where we go there. Constable Labby asked about protection, and I can tell him that every French vessel that enters our territorial waters is now fitted with a vessel monitoring system, which allows us to monitor everything they do. And they have a system on board which transmits their position, the speed and the heading. And indeed that Jersey was the first place in the British Isles to use this information to successfully prosecute fishermen. So our fisheries vessel continues to work at sea, and I believe is at sea today. The other one I wanted to mention, sir, quite rightly before I get to the final summing up, is Deputy Catherine Curtis, who spoke about facilities and dredging, the future for dredging. So in the plan, sir, there is a priority for providing facilities on shore for the fishing community. I think we all appreciate how important it is, especially with individual quick freezing of portions, whether that be shellfish or wetfish, And that's something I very much want to look forward to in the future with the Economic Development Minister. But as ever, our challenge is money and the cost of creating this infrastructure. But it's something that is prioritised in the plan. And finally, the Deputy mentioned the future of dredging. Well, sir, as an ex-oyster farmer and mussel farmer, I have to say to the Assembly, if you gave me the option of which food I would choose to have on my plate for supper, scallops are there at the top of the list. I think they're the most wonderful, wonderful seafood, and whilst in a whole range of wonderful seafood that we can produce in Jersey. And I have to say to the Deputy that in winter, dredging provides scallops in the times of year when no one can get in, let alone under the water, to provide those scallops. It is a method of fishing that's part of the tapestry of our fishing industry. And through careful delivery of the plan, I am confident that we can find a continued way through the Rural and Marine Economy Scheme to find an economical and, more importantly, environmental way to keep these boats fishing. So the future of the scallop of the dredging industry is not rosy, but they can be assured that they get the commitment from myself and the Minister for Economic Development to find ways to keep them working, because as the Chief Minister said much earlier today, the industry do not want handouts, they don't want compensation, they want to be able to continue to prosecute the livelihood they've learnt over generations. So this marine plan looks to balance the cultural, environmental, economic and social priorities of the island while proposing significant modernisations of how we manage our marine space. I'm so pleased that the Assembly today has had the opportunity to set this clear direction of travel. I want to thank all members who have contributed to the debate. The fact that we've been here for some hours now, the length of some of the speeches, but they've been good speeches, all of them, even if we haven't agreed. People have taken the time to read, to think, to research and come up with their own conclusions. So I want to thank them all, islanders especially, and our friends and cousins across the water for engaging with the development of this plan. It's a stronger document for the countless hours that we've all put into examining, testing, reporting on it. I'd like to also thank, sir, again, my scrutiny panel for examining and reporting in detail on the plan. It is a good report, really good review, and as I've said before, I've been looking to respond to their findings and recommendations and working with them moving forward as we develop this plan further. I hope members will be able to vote unanimously in favour of this plan. I want to create a stable state for our seas and those especially who rely on it for their work and their play. We all depend, after all, on the water to live, to breathe, to thrive, and long may that continue. Sir, this is a plan that balances. It balances cultural heritage, recreation and tourism, the commercial and the natural environment with biodiversity. It's a plan that looks to the UK and the continent for working together, our energy and our connectivity. Sir, I say this quite often in this Assembly, but compromise and politics, to me, go hand in hand. Discussing issues face to face, finding the middle ground, working together is always the best way forward. It's never easy, but I hope that in this marine spatial plan, we've come to a place where we can still balance all the considerations that we've mentioned here today. And they do need to be balanced if we are to ultimately be successful. Sir, as Deputy Wren have said, and I thank him for his work that he did previous to this, is as much his plan as mine. This is a good plan. This is a really good plan. It's born out of a huge amount of work from the officers, and I absolutely 100% agree with the Deputy when he says we have the most phenomenal team in marine resources. And I thank them, especially, sir, for the work they put in. I won't dwell further, sir. I commend this plan to the Assembly and ask them to vote positively, and I call for the appel.
That is called for. I invite members not sitting in the chamber to return to their seats. The vote is on the Marine Spatial Plan P44. I ask the referee to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The plan has been adopted. 40 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions.
I propose the adjournment, please.
The adjournment is proposed. I would just mention to members that we will start immediately after the adjournment with an urgent oral question that has been allowed. I'm afraid I don't have the wording of it in front of me, but I'm sure it will be circulated to members, and I will allow 10 minutes of questions in connection with that, because that is what was allowed for questions without notice on the last occasion. With notice, rather. Very well. We stand adjourned until 2:50.